Hey guys, tonight we're unravelling the oozing, feverish, almost unbelievable final chapter of Henry VIII, the bloated lion of the Tudor dynasty, whose death was less majestic end and more cursed horror show. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. Not emotionally anyway. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I want to picture you. Maybe it's 11:47 PM in Oslo, your cat's already asleep, the hallway lights flickering. Perfect. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in a dark stone chamber, and the smell hits you first. An oily blend of meat grease, stale beer, and something coppery and sick underneath. Welcome to Henry VIII's bedchamber in the winter of 1546. Outside, England freezes under sheets of snow and politics. But inside this royal oven of misery, it's warm with sweat and secrets. The fire crackles, the king wheezes, and you? You're a fly on the velvet wall, watching history ferment in real time. Henry isn't really a man anymore. He's a mountain of pain. Seated on a throne-like chair, barely able to move, he breathes through puffy, inflamed nostrils and tries to scratch at his bandaged leg. That leg. Oh, we'll get to the leg. But for now, let's just say it smells like roasted death, and is wrapped in enough linen to qualify as its own mummy. His face, once regal and commanding, is buried beneath folds of flesh and a permanent expression of rage fatigue. His eyes are glassy, yellowed with illness, and always watching, always suspicious. You don't make it through 6 wives and countless betrayals without learning to look over your shoulder, even when it hurts to turn your neck. A servant shifts nervously near the fire, turning a hunk of venison that Henry demanded but barely touched. Another servant, one with a surprisingly robust nose, is pinching it shut subtly, trying to withstand the king's smell. Not out of cruelty, mind you, just survival instinct. You can't exactly ask your boss to bathe when your boss is Henry VIII, and he still technically owns the power to execute you. These are his final months, but nobody dares say it. To suggest the king is dying is treason adjacent. So the court talks in euphemisms. His Majesty is resting. His Majesty requires more quiet than usual. His Majesty is contemplating the divine. But behind the silks and flattery, panic creeps. Everyone knows the crown is about to come loose, and when it does, heads will roll. Not metaphorically. Tudor transitions don't do smooth. In a way, Henry's body mirrors his reign. It's bloated with indulgence, scarred by battle, unstable beneath the surface, and, most importantly, dangerous. You can't just walk away from a monarch like this, not when he's made enemies of Rome, dissolved centuries-old monasteries, rewritten marriage laws like he's editing a bad script, and stacked up a pile of enemies that could form a decent moat if frozen and lined up right. Here's the thing. We all know kings die, but Henry? He seems like the kind who'd try to haunt his own body to avoid it. And honestly, there's something almost supernatural about how long he clings on. His health has been bad for over a decade now. Arthritis, obesity, likely type 2 diabetes, a probable case of McLeod syndrome, more on that later, and most famously, a leg wound so infected it makes medieval battlefield injuries look hygienic. It's been oozing, crusting, and reopening since the 1530s, the medical equivalent of an open tab at a poison bar. One courtier writes delicately that the wound smelled ill. Another, less delicately, says, one could not enter the chamber without wishing to faint. Even his dogs, once loyal companions, are said to shy away from him. Imagine that. A king who's gone from lion to landfill. And yet, despite all this decay, the man still rules. With iron breath, he signs decrees, rearranges his will, and manipulates factions like chess pieces made of human ambition. He plays Protestant against Catholic, foreign power against foreign power, friend against friend. Even on what should be his deathbed, he's scheming. That's Henry, never resting, always calculating, even when pus is seeping through his bandages. But deep beneath the royal grumbles and barely functioning body systems, something else stirs. Fear. Not just fear of death, though it's there, dark and pulsing like the abscess in his leg, but fear of irrelevance. Henry's obsessed with legacy. He's terrified that his carefully constructed image, defender of the faith turned excommunicated outcast turned supreme head of the Church of England, will be reduced to a footnote or a cautionary tale. And frankly, he's right to worry. The country's unstable. His heir, Edward, is a sickly boy of 9. His daughters, Mary and Elizabeth, are brilliant but controversial. And his enemies, they're just waiting for the bells to toll. Now, here's a lesser-known oddity. Henry orders his coffin made before he dies. That's not entirely weird. Lots of royals plan their burial. But here's the kicker. He has it made from thick lead and requests it be big enough to contain all. All what, though? His body? His soul? His secrets? Some say he feared his corpse might burst. Others whisper it was to keep something in. Either way, it's weirdly poetic. Historians debate endlessly about what truly killed Henry. Was it complications from untreated type 2 diabetes, kidney failure, a final, fatal stroke? Or the increasingly accepted view, McLeod syndrome, a rare genetic disorder that explains his leg issues, mood swings and cognitive decline? Honestly, take your pick. It's a buffet of bad endings. And yet in this moment, in this reeking velvet-draped mausoleum of a bedroom, none of that matters to him. He's looking into the fire, eyes unfocused, lips moving in a silent conversation with someone. Maybe his past wives. Maybe God. Maybe just the ghost of the boy he used to be. Young, athletic, hopeful, and above all powerful. That boy is long gone. But something in the flames flickers like it remembers. And you stand there, caught in the hum of crackling wood and laboured breathing, watching a king prepare to meet the one opponent he can't execute. Not yet, but soon. You know the rhyme. Divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. But tonight, it's more than a nursery jingle. It's a haunted doorbell to 6 separate rooms of chaos, desire and political chess. You float through them now, each chamber revealing a different wife of Henry VIII, each marriage a thread unravelling the king's mind and legacy. You're not just watching love lives fall apart, you're watching a monarchy rot from the inside out. First stop, Catherine of Aragon, the Spanish princess, Henry's first and, according to some, only true wife in his eyes. You see her at 16, arriving in England bright-eyed and fluent in Latin. You feel her nerves, the cold dampness of an unfamiliar island, and the political weight pressing down her back like the heavy embroidery of her dress. She marries Henry's older brother Arthur, who promptly dies. Then she marries Henry. It's a love match at first. Yes, even Henry had those. But 20 years and one surviving child later, the love curdles into resentment. Henry wants a male heir, and Catherine's womb unfairly becomes the battlefield. He tries to annul the marriage, and when the Pope says no, Henry breaks from the Catholic Church like a spoiled teen storming out of a family dinner. This isn't just a breakup, it's a seismic event. Europe gasps, monasteries burn, people die, and Catherine, exiled and dying alone, refuses to say she was anything but queen. A tragic flex, really. Henry's conscience? Silent, if it's there at all. Now Anne Boleyn enters, and the temperature spikes. You can feel it. The room thickens with ambition, perfume, and sharp intelligence. Anne is no simpering court lady. She's educated, Protestant-leaning, and dazzling in a way that makes other women vanish when she walks in. Henry is obsessed. For 7 years he courts her, promising marriage, power, and the moon. And Anne, she believes him. But power is fickle in this court. Anne gives birth to Elizabeth, not a son, and the king's patience snaps like a dry twig. Whispers of witchcraft, affairs, and incest begin. Historians still argue, was she guilty or a scapegoat? Either way, she kneels before a French swordsman in 1536, and her eyes reportedly never close even as her head falls. Henry wears white the next day. Subtlety is not his strong suit. Wife 3, Jane Seymour, is the only one who gives him what he wants, a male heir. Prince Edward is born in a storm of blood and screaming, and Jane dies days later. Henry mourns this one, deeply. Or so he claims. Maybe it's guilt. Maybe it's that she died before she could disappoint him. Her face is the one he keeps in his chambers, even as time blurs the features. Quiet, obedient Jane, perfect in death. Then there's Anne of Cleves, imported from Germany like a royal IKEA kit, and Henry is disappointed from the moment she steps off the ship. He claims she looks like a horse. You watch his face fall during their first meeting. His disappointment is almost comical in its pettiness. The marriage is annulled within 6 months. But here's the twist. Anne ends up the real winner. She gets a generous settlement, 2 houses, and never has to sleep with Henry again. She becomes his sister, attends court events, and lives comfortably until her death. Historians often call her the luckiest wife. It's not a high bar. Catherine Howard follows, and the déjà vu is brutal. She's a teenager, full of laughter and poor judgment, and Henry, now over 50 and barely able to walk, becomes infatuated. She cheats, or maybe she flirts, or maybe she just exists too freely for a woman under a rotting monarchy. Whatever the reason, she's beheaded at 19. Her last words: "I die a queen, but I would rather have died the wife of Culpeper." Oof. Finally, Catherine Parr, wife number 6. She's the caretaker, the clever survivor who manages to outlive the king. She nearly gets executed too, accused of heresy, after arguing theology with Henry, but she flatters him just in time. She nurses him through his final years, manages his moods, and probably thinks a lot about arsenic. She deserves a medal for patience alone. You start to notice a pattern. Henry isn't just marrying women, he's using them as mirrors, projectors, and punching bags. Each wife reflects a different insecurity, a different failure, a different craving he can't quite name. And when they stop reflecting him in the right way, off with their heads, or at least out with their titles. But the strange part is, you can still see his heartbreak. Somewhere deep under the layers of gout, sweat, and crown polish, there was once a man who wanted love. Maybe. Or maybe that's just the soft glow of historical hindsight. After all, it's easier to imagine a tragic king than a cruel one. But Henry makes that hard. One fringe theory: that Anne Boleyn wasn't executed for infidelity at all, but because she knew something big, like secret paternity scandals or even dark rituals. The Tudors attract these theories like open wounds attract flies. Are they true? Who knows? But they exist in the margins, buzzing and unnerving. And here's the scholarly debate that still rages on. Was Henry a monster by nature, or did power deform something human in him? Was he born cold, or did the weight of a dying dynasty, religious warfare, and desperate succession anxiety grind him down until only cruelty was left? Some historians argue he was shaped by trauma. His brother's early death, his father's distant rule, the pressure of creating a Tudor legacy. Others say nope. The guy was just an egotistical brute who got worse as his health declined. Either way, the wives are gone now. Some buried, some burned into national memory. And Henry sits alone, flanked by ghosts, and increasingly unsure if he still has the favour of God or anyone. The smell of roasted venison lingers in the hall, but beneath it, just faintly, you catch something fouler. It's not the sour musk of sweat, or the sourer secrets of court politics. It's Henry's leg. Or more specifically, what used to be his leg before it became whatever this is now. Tonight you descend into the meat problem. Picture it. A banquet so loud the walls sweat. You sit at the edge of a long oak table staring at an endless parade of meats. Beef, lamb, swan, goose, and maybe something that used to bark. The plates glisten with fat. The trenchers soak up blood. Henry chomps at the centre, ripping into haunches with a sort of religious fervour. His face is red, eyes bloodshot, mouth forever wet. This isn't indulgence, it's war. Against hunger, against time, against weakness. See, Henry's diet isn't just rich, it's suicidal. At his peak, he consumes upwards of 5,000 calories a day, mostly from meat and ale. No fruits, no vegetables, unless you count decorative parsley. Just piles of flesh and jugs of drink, chased with sweetmeats and prayer. You'd think this might be a rare indulgence, but no, this is daily. The royal kitchens were basically meat factories, and you can almost hear the livestock of England sigh with exhaustion. And the meat takes its toll. Over the years, Henry balloons. He used to be trim, even athletic. Remember, he jousted, hunted, and played tennis like a noble frat boy. But the moment injury sidelines him, the calories settle, the blood thickens, the heart works overtime, and that leg, that cursed, putrid leg, starts whispering doom. Let's get into the leg, because no one else really wants to. The story goes that in 1536 Henry falls during a joust. A horse collapses on him. Something tears, something cracks. He's unconscious for hours, maybe even dead for a minute or two. He wakes up but never walks the same again. The leg swells. Over time, a wound opens that refuses to close, and we're not talking a paper cut here. We're talking a deep, ulcerous tunnel of flesh that leaks pus, blood, and, depending on the day, regret. They try everything. Poultices of herbs, heated knives, sliced onions wrapped in cloth, even live pigeons applied directly to the skin. Nothing works. The infection tunnel's deeper. It begins to stink, like metal, rot, and something worse. It's said that on humid days the smell reaches the hallway. You're standing in that hallway now holding your breath. Quirky fact, the king had a custom-designed mechanical walking device, a sort of proto-wheelchair mixed with a hoist just to get around. The man could barely stand, yet he insisted on public appearances. That's power for you. Too proud to admit decay, too famous to hide it. And you wonder, in quiet moments, what that does to a psyche. To be a man once praised for your physique, now unable to climb stairs without being carried, to feel yourself rotting while still alive. There's a cruel poetry to it. Henry doesn't just suffer physically, he becomes a walking metaphor for a kingdom that's losing its structural integrity. Now, among modern historians and medical sleuths, theories about that leg run wild. Some say diabetes, based on the chronic nature of the wound and Henry's sugar obsession. Others blame osteomyelitis, a bone infection that, untreated, can erode tissue like fire through silk. And a small but passionate camp believes it was Fournier's gangrene, an even more disturbing possibility that involves necrotic tissue, sepsis, and a smell you don't forget. You'd be amazed what a little royal blood does to a medical mystery. There are entire conferences about that leg. It's probably more famous than most of his advisors. But here's where it gets really dark. The leg isn't just a symptom, it's a trigger. A festering sore becomes the hinge on which policies turn. When Henry's in pain, heads roll faster. When the swelling worsens, so does his temper. He starts cancelling meetings, avoiding counsel, signing death warrants in batches. Whole factions disappear when the pus gets thick. In this strange, horrible way, the king's leg becomes a geopolitical weather system. If the bandage leaks, someone's getting arrested. You watch his servants tend to it. They peel off the old dressing like unwrapping a sin. The flesh beneath is pink, raw, sometimes green. One physician mutters about cauterization, another recommends calming the humours with leeches. Henry just groans and demands wine. He knows better than to trust them now. He's outlived most of his doctors anyway. Fringe detail? There's a rumour, buried in letters and idle gossip, that the leg wound once opened during a formal ceremony. Henry stood too long. Something ruptured. The sound was described as a wet tearing followed by silence. No official record confirms it, but courtiers that day reportedly fled the room gagging. The king did not stand again for weeks, and all the while the palace pretends this is fine. Courtiers compliment his endurance, ministers praise his resolve, but behind closed doors they light incense and practice how to bow without gagging. You can't help but feel a bit for them, trapped in a theatre of rot, pretending the star isn't dying right in front of them. Scholars still debate whether Henry's grotesque decline was mostly physical or psychological. Did the pain trigger the paranoia, or did the paranoia create the pain? Maybe both. What's clear is that the leg becomes more than a leg. It's a symbol of decay, of guilt, of stubborn pride refusing to yield. And you? You back away slowly, the image of the bandaged leg burning in your mind. You won't forget that sight, or the smell, or the way Henry smiles just slightly, as if daring you to look away. Because to him, looking away means weakness, and if there's one thing the king cannot abide, even now it's weakness. You're standing outside the king's chamber, but tonight you're not alone. There's a silence hanging over the palace, not peaceful silence, but that twitchy kind that follows a scream. You feel it in your gut. Something's wrong. You slip through the heavy door and there he is, sprawled in the massive bed like a dying bear in a nest of silks. His eyes are fluttering. He's talking to someone who isn't there. But don't lean in too close. You might hear names you recognise. Anne, Jane, Thomas More, maybe even Wolsey. Maybe they've come to settle scores. Henry is dreaming again, and this time it's not the usual royal nonsense. There's something creeping through his subconscious, something he can't escape, not with money, not with titles, and not with his ever-growing collection of religious relics. These aren't dreams, these are hauntings. You step into his mind, and it's not what you expected. It's not a castle, not a battlefield. It's a corridor of doors. Behind each one, a woman, a wife, a regret. They don't shout, they don't scream, they just stare. Silent, unmoving, powerful in their stillness. Catherine of Aragon wears the face of justice. Anne Boleyn wears the face of betrayal. Jane Seymour's eyes are soft, but her silence cuts deeper than any executioner. Catherine Howard trembles slightly, still young, still terrified. Elizabeth's face appears too, older now, watching, waiting for her father's judgment. The dream doesn't let him speak, it only lets him remember. He wakes with a gasp and the stink of the room slams you back into reality. He's sweating through his sheets again. They'll need to be burned. A servant, too young to understand the full weight of this moment, dabs at his forehead with cloth that used to be part of a bishop's robe. It's been repurposed. Everything here has. The kingdom's finances are brittle, and Henry's body is costing them a fortune. It takes a full staff just to maintain the illusion that their monarch isn't rotting from the inside out. This isn't the first time he's been haunted. In the months before Anne Boleyn's execution, Henry swore he saw a raven in his bedchamber, even though the windows were closed and no one else saw it. He called it a sign. Some thought he meant a warning, others said he believed it was Anne's soul. In the years since, he's seen other things. Shadows that don't belong, cold drafts in windowless rooms, voices during prayers. Maybe it's the fever, maybe it's guilt, or maybe it's just what happens when a man tries to outmaneuver fate for too long. Fringe detail. There are letters, real ones, where ambassadors and nobles record strange events near the king. Lights moving in hallways, the sounds of weeping when no one is around. Servants swear the temperature in the royal chapel dropped every time he entered it in the last year. One priest even claimed he saw blood on the altar when Henry passed by, but no one dared investigate. You don't chase ghosts when the king is one of them. Of course, historians will tell you dreams are dreams, that visions and hauntings in the 1500s are often just symptoms of disease. Fevers cause hallucinations. Sleep paralysis explains the weight on Henry's chest at night. But here's the thing. The more you learn about this period, the less convincing that all sounds. Because too many people saw too much weird stuff around Henry in his final days, too many coincidences, and none of it ever quite stopped. You look at him now, gulping in air like a dying fish, and realise he's terrified of sleep. He fights it. He rages against it, because when he sleeps the walls come down, the ghosts get in, and no amount of royal blood or papal defiance can save him from the court inside his own head. There's something poetic about this. The man who tore England from the Catholic Church now can't get through a night without muttering about devils. He defied Rome, he rewrote heaven, and now he can't sleep without being dragged through a personal hell. You watch as he squeezes a small wooden crucifix, lips moving in frantic prayer. It's ironic. He spent most of his reign positioning himself as the voice of God in England, and now he can't even trust the silence of his own chamber. Scholarly debate time. Was Henry religious, or just politically religious? Some argue he truly believed in his divine authority. Others claim it was all pragmatic, a power grab disguised as spiritual reformation. But watching him now, hands trembling over rosary beads he once banned, you sense the truth lives somewhere in between. He believed when it suited him. He doubted when it didn't. And in the end, he feared both damnation and being forgotten. The room dims, the candle sputters, and you swear just for a moment the temperature drops. Henry stops breathing. Not permanently, not yet, but just long enough to look dead. You freeze. So do the servants. Then he gasps and everyone exhales. You begin to understand the rhythm of life in this room. It's not lived in hours or days, it's lived in breaths. Each one could be the last. And maybe that's why the nightmares are getting worse. He's running out of time to make peace, and there's so much blood behind him. So many names carved into the walls of his memory. Wolsey, Cromwell, More, Anne, Catherine, Thomas Culpeper, the Carthusian monks he starved. His mind is crowded. You step back as Henry begins to mutter again. Something about fire. Something about a crown made of ash. He's quoting scripture now, twisting it, making it fit his fear. Ashes to ashes, but the crown endures, he whispers. You wonder if he truly believes that, or if he just wants to. Outside the palace, the wind howls. London sleeps uneasily, as if it knows that something ancient is ending. And inside you watch a king slip between nightmares, carried on the backs of ghosts who never really left. The wind is still clawing at the palace walls, but inside the temperature has risen. Not from the fire, which sputters low in the hearth, but from the king himself, sweating, thrashing, eyes half shut like someone caught between two worlds. You've entered another night in Henry VIII's slow-motion exit, and tonight the ghosts are more talkative than usual. You find yourself drawn to the edges of his vision, watching the dream unfold. It's not the corridor again, it's a feast. Long tables stretch endlessly in both directions, groaning under the weight of roasted animals, fruits out of season, and golden goblets full to the brim. There's laughter, the clink of knives and cups, the buttery murmur of nobles enjoying the illusion of safety. At the head sits Henry, young and vibrant, legs strong, eyes wild with charm and hunger. But around him sit the dead. Anne Boleyn lifts a chalice with fingers too pale. Thomas More carves meat that bleeds too much. Jane Seymour smiles too wide. Even Cardinal Wolsey is there holding a plate he never eats from. One by one they turn to look at the king. One by one they say nothing. And Henry. He begins to notice. This is the new theme of his dreams. Not just ghosts, but banquets of judgment. His mind is staging a trial with every nightfall, and the jury is exclusively made up of people he's destroyed. It's not guilt, exactly. Henry doesn't do guilt. It's deeper. It's the creeping suspicion that for all his titles and power, he's losing control of the narrative, and that's when it hits you. Henry isn't afraid of death. He's afraid of being edited. Waking comes hard this time. He jerks up, limbs tangled in soaked sheets, and emits a groan so guttural it seems to scrape the stone walls. Servants rush in, holding cloths, trays, potions. One brings the holy oil early, but another stops him. Too soon, the king might notice. The real sacrament is planned, but no one knows how long they have. This is the rhythm now. Wake, panic, bleed, repeat. Each morning Henry takes inventory of who still listens to him. Councillors shuffle in to deliver news and pretend everything is fine. Spain sent another letter. The treasury is being adjusted. Edward is healthy. All lies, of course. Spain is circling like a hawk. The treasury is dry. Edward coughs blood. But Henry likes lies when they sound polished. The only voice he listens to lately is his own, replaying old speeches, re-signing decrees, rewriting the past with a trembling hand. You sit across from him as he dictates letters to no one. Let it be recorded, he begins, again and again, as if raw words can stitch together a legacy crumbling by the hour. And you notice something odd in the room. A book, thick and leather-bound, lying open by his bedside. It's not the Bible. It's a log, not his own writings, but a court report. Dates, trials, executions. He's been reading his own terror like a bedtime story, keeping score, checking for patterns, or just reminding himself who lost. Fringe fact, there's a record of Henry requesting, shortly before his death, to have certain names removed from court documents, not just stricken through, removed, vanished. Cromwell's among them. So is Anne of Cleves. It's as if, with enough erasures, he could trim down the cast of his life to just the loyal few and the flattering dead. Historians debate the extent of these redactions, but palace archives from that year are riddled with gaps, like moths have eaten the paper, or someone wanted them eaten. And then there's the music. That's right. The king's favourite pastime in better years, now turned on its head. He orders musicians to play in the next room, not for pleasure, but for control. Harps and viols murmur faintly through the walls, and the moment they stop, Henry flails. 1. Night, a lute string snaps mid-song and he orders the player flogged. The man survives, but his music doesn't. No one plays off-key again. Here's the scholarly debate to chew on. Did Henry's grasp on reality actually snap in these final months, or was he completely aware and just furious about it? Some argue his mental deterioration was inevitable, driven by illness, isolation, and a broken body. Others think he remained lucid, even brilliant in moments, using drama to bend those around him to his will. After all, he still dictates changes to his will. He still names successors. He still manages to be terrifying. That doesn't scream delirious. That screams dying tyrant with a plan. But his body betrays him more each day. The wound on his leg seeps through the dressing and into the mattress. The mattress is replaced, then the frame. Eventually, they just start layering cloth until the bed looks more like a funeral pyre. His sleep is shallow. His waking hours are punctuated by unpredictable bursts of violence. At one point, he throws a goblet at a page for bowing too low. Another time, he accuses his physician of poisoning him, then rewards him with a coin the next morning. You begin to wonder if the ghosts are truly in his head, or if he's just finally tuning in to the ones we all carry. In rare moments of quiet, when the candles burn low, and even the guards whisper softer, Henry stares at nothing. No scripture, no leg, just air. And sometimes he speaks, not to anyone present, but to the void. "Was it worth it?" he says once, too softly for the scribe to write. You hear it, though. You hear it and wonder who he's asking, God, his wives, you. And still, the dream feast waits for him every night. Every time he closes his eyes, they gather again. No one eats, no one drinks. They just wait. Patiently. Because kings may command armies, but in the end, even they have to answer the invitations they sent themselves. You'd think by now someone might have figured out how to make a king feel better, but no. Tonight, the scent in Henry's chamber is a blend of wine-soaked linens, burning sage and something sharper, an old unmistakable tang of medicine that doesn't work. This is the era of royal quackery, and you, unfortunately, are standing in the splash zone of 16th century healthcare. The first doctor in the room has brought a glass vial of something yellowish and suspicious. He calls it a spirit tonic. It smells like rotting apples and funeral candles. He insists it will balance the humours. That phrase gets tossed around a lot in these halls, usually by men who haven't washed their hands in weeks. You watch as Henry's lips part, his tongue sluggish, and the tonic is poured in. A beat, then a gag, then a punch thrown in the doctor's general direction. The royal humours remain unbalanced. Every few hours another physician appears, each more desperate and theatrical than the last. One lays leeches along Henry's inner thigh, convinced the problem is overheated blood. Another suggests burning aromatic herbs beneath the bed to cleanse evil vapours, and someone else, looking deeply apologetic, recommends drilling a small hole in the king's skull to release spiritual pressure. He is politely, violently escorted out. This is Tudor medicine at its finest. Equal parts alchemy, superstition and panic. No germ theory, no real understanding of infection, just centuries of inherited guesswork, often delivered with terrifying confidence. If you're feeling brave, take a peek inside the Royal Apothecary. You'll find jars of crushed pearls, powdered antlers, dried toad skin, and something labelled simply as mummy. Spoiler, it might actually be ground-up corpse. People in this time believed human remains, especially from ancient tombs, could transfer vitality. Henry has some on his nightstand, just in case. And let's not forget the astrology. Henry's personal physician, Dr. William Butts, yes, that was really his name, once consulted the stars before prescribing enemas. You imagine him standing in the garden, peering at Venus through a lens, muttering to himself about bowel alignment. One courtier swears that in 1545, Mercury was retrograde during a bloodletting, and that's why the king nearly passed out for 3 days. Makes perfect sense, right? But here's the real problem. The king doesn't trust any of them. He listens to their advice, then does the opposite. One minute he's demanding syrup of poppies to sleep. The next he's ordering it burned because it might invite the devil. You're watching a man with absolute power try to navigate absolute decay, and it's getting embarrassing. Not just for him, but for everyone forced to pretend he still has control. One of the more disturbing treatments involves wrapping the leg in a poultice made of cow dung and rosemary. The theory is that the rosemary purifies, and the dung draws out toxins. You can't tell if this is brilliant folk healing or straight-up sabotage. Either way, it doesn't work. The leg smells worse the next morning, and 3 of the attendants catch a fever. Fringe fact. One record from the king's household describes a treatment involving the application of pigeons to the foot. Yes, live pigeons. They were plucked, split open, and strapped to the infected limb to draw out malignancy. No word on whether the pigeons volunteered for this. The smell alone must have sent the rest of the aviary into therapy. And here comes the scholars' debate. Were these physicians actually charlatans, or were they simply the best the time had to offer? It's easy to scoff at dried lizard powder and lunar bloodletting now, but in their defence, they didn't have microscopes or antibiotics. They were working with what they had, which was mostly prayer, leeches, and the occasional horror show involving powdered emeralds. Some argue that these were dedicated men, earnest in their desperation to heal a man already beyond saving. Others suggest they were opportunists, clinging to royal favour with flashy treatments and well-placed Latin phrases. Probably both. But here's what's undeniable. Henry's getting worse. Much worse. His face is swollen, his eyes sink deeper each day. He can no longer stand, and sometimes he forgets where he is. There are stretches of silence now, hours where he speaks to no one, not even himself. The physicians whisper outside the door, not because they have a new plan, but because they're terrified of being blamed when the inevitable comes. There's an unspoken ritual forming. When the sun rises, one physician approaches to check if he's still breathing. It's never the same man twice. They rotate like it's a cursed duty. You watch as a young one, barely more than a student, places a hand on the king's damp chest and waits. A pause, a nod, still alive, barely. He steps back, exhaling like he's survived a duel. Henry's faith in medicine, like his body, is unravelling. He won't take the tonics anymore. He spits out the powders. The most he allows is water, and only from a specific silver goblet. There's a belief, some whispered myth, that silver wards off corruption. It doesn't, of course, but you let him believe it. At this point, faith is all that's keeping the screaming at bay, and somewhere in all this the priests begin to arrive, not loudly, not officially. They enter quietly, dressed in travelling cloaks, disguised almost as visitors. One carries oil, one carries a book, one carries nothing but a worn expression. You know what they're here for, even if Henry doesn't yet. Or maybe he does. Maybe that's why the room smells more like incense and less like vinegar today. The king watches them without comment. No jokes, no orders, just his eyes, foggy but locked on the cleric's face as if waiting for something unspoken to pass between them. The priest bows. Henry doesn't move. There's something unspeakably strange about watching a man this powerful prepare for death with treatments that sound like fairy tale curses. But that's the world he lives in. You die how you live. And Henry, he lived large, messy and stubborn. So of course he'll die under a pile of pigeon feathers, cow dung and royal denial. And as you step back into the hallway, leaving the latest round of failed cures behind, you realise something chilling. The medicine isn't keeping him alive anymore. It's just slowing the story down. The palace is quieter now. Not peaceful, just quieter. Like a storm has passed through, but the sky hasn't decided whether to clear or thunder again. Inside Henry's chamber, the curtains stay drawn, the air stays stale, and the king, despite it all, is still breathing. Barely. You sit with him in the dimness, watching his chest rise and fall beneath a mountain of velvet and fur. But tonight, we go deeper, past the wound, past the rituals, and into the soft grey corridors of Henry's brain. You'd expect arrogance, right? A man who took a kingdom from the Pope, who executed wives, who rewrote laws like they were diary entries. Surely his mind is made of steel. But no, what you find there is noise. A cluttered attic, half-formed prayers jammed against memories of hunting trips, lovers' voices interwoven with public speeches, dreams dissolving into paranoia. There's no order, just static, and the slow rot of a man who hasn't trusted anyone in years. At the heart of that static is one thought that never leaves him. Who am I if I'm not feared? Henry's sense of self is entirely performance-based. That glittering image of the Renaissance monarch, the artist, the scholar, the divine ruler, isn't just for the people, it's for him. He needs it, craves it. He built it carefully, layer by layer, hiding the insecure child beneath. The son of Henry VII, the awkward second boy, turned surprise heir when his older brother died. That early trauma left fingerprints all over his reign. He wasn't supposed to rule. Arthur was the golden boy, and when Arthur died, young Henry, bookish, emotional, not yet hardened, was thrown into the mould of power like wet clay. It changed him, hardened him, but never fully. Deep inside, that original version of Henry never quite left. You glimpse him sometimes, in his obsession with being adored, in the theatrical romantic gestures, in the way he stares at tapestries of his younger self for hours. His brain, by now, is a battlefield of decay and memory. Scholars suspect many things: Cushing's syndrome, MacLeod syndrome, late-stage syphilis, chronic traumatic encephalopathy from all those jousts and head injuries. Each theory explains the mood swings, the sudden rages, the bizarre bursts of energy followed by long silences. His memory falters. He repeats things. One minute he's sharp, clever, calculating. The next he's talking to a chair like it's Woolsey. The MacLeod syndrome theory is particularly compelling. It's a rare genetic disorder that causes muscle deterioration, erratic behaviour, and personality changes, especially in men. It would explain the leg, the paranoia, the fading memory, but it's unprovable. No DNA test, no brain scans, just a trail of weird behaviours and suspicious rants that make modern doctors sigh and historians argue. And the arguments, they're loud. Some claim Henry was fully lucid until the end. His cruelty was policy, not madness. Others see the downward spiral of a man whose body failed him so completely it took his mind along for the ride. But you're watching it happen in real time. You see the flicker of lucidity when he discusses naval treaties one minute, then accuses the footstool of treason the next. You hear him ask after his mother, who died 35 years ago. You hear him call his current wife Anne, and then Jane, and then Mother. He forgets, then remembers too much. And there's that moment, you'll never forget it, where he calls for his old fool Will Summers. Will hasn't been at court in months, possibly years. But Henry insists. He tells me the truth, he says, teeth yellow and clenched. You glance at the nearest servant. No one moves. No one dares mention that Will's gone. So instead, a page is sent to fetch someone who can pretend to be Will, or at least make the king laugh. It's theatre again. Always theatre. But the real Will did serve a deeper purpose. He was more than comic relief. He was a pressure valve, the only one allowed to mock the king without losing his head. And Henry, even now, hungers for that. A voice not dulled by fear. Someone who sees him not as a god, but as a man slowly falling apart in an unwashed nightshirt. You wonder how often he's wished for a true friend in these final weeks. Someone to say, "You're scared. It's okay." But there's no one left who speaks to Henry like that. Not since Cromwell was beheaded. Not since Wolsey died of shame. Not since More smiled from the scaffold. Everyone else plays the game. And the king? He's forgotten how to stop. Fringe fact for the night. Henry once kept a lion in the Tower of London. Not as a symbol, not as a threat, just as a possession. A breathing metaphor. It's said that late in life he asked if the lion was still there. When told it had died years before, he looked stunned. "I thought it would outlive us all," he said. Maybe he wasn't talking about the lion. Inside his head, the king is rewriting history with every flicker of consciousness. He tells the priests he's always been faithful. He tells the scribes he never hated the Pope, only questioned him. He tells himself that the executions were necessary, that love turned sour, that he was a good man, just surrounded by traitors, and maybe part of him believes it. Because the alternative, that he's the villain in his own story, is too heavy to carry. And so he babbles, recounts old glories, names ships and battles no one else remembers. His mind staggers under the weight of ghosts, politics and pain, but it lurches forward anyway. Because even if the body fails, the king still has one weapon left, his voice. But even that is fraying now. You listen as he whispers to the air about Edward, how the boy must be strong, how the world must not see fear. "I have given him a kingdom," he says. "They must not smell the blood." You look around the room, it smells of nothing else. As he drifts again into sleep, jaw slack, hands twitching, you sense the walls of his mind closing tighter. The space for reality grows smaller, the echoes get louder, and you know, sooner rather than later, he won't come back out of that dream at all. The fire has burned low again, and someone's forgotten to stoke it. You can feel the chill seep in under the heavy stone archways, but no one moves to warm the king's room. Everyone's waiting, for orders, for a sign, for the moment they're finally allowed to admit out loud that the king is dying. You sit near the far wall, watching the scene unfold like a slow-burning play. The servants have stopped pretending they don't notice. The physicians have started whispering in Latin as if that makes their dread more official. Henry lies in bed, the covers now more shroud than comfort, mumbling something about Edward. Always Edward. Because now it's not about Henry anymore. It's about who comes next. Succession panic. It hangs in the room like incense. Sour, thick, impossible to ignore. The King's will has been rewritten multiple times. So many times, in fact, that no one's entirely sure which version is the final one. The wax seals are stacked on top of one another like nervous fingerprints, each representing a different political mood swing. First Edward is heir, then Mary is included, then excluded, then Elizabeth is added back in, but only if certain stars align and the wind blows just so. You'd need a team of prophets, lawyers, and chess masters to make sense of it. And here's the problem. Edward is 9, a sickly 9 at that. Pale, delicate, often ill. If Henry is a crumbling monument of meat and fury, Edward is a fragile glass figurine wrapped in prophecy and paternal hope. Henry loves him. Not the warm, nurturing kind of love, of course. More the anxious, dynastic kind. He sees Edward as the key to immortality, his living statue, proof that all the marriages, all the executions, all the screaming at bishops were worth it. But beneath the father's pride is something darker. Fear. What if Edward fails? What if he dies young? Or worse, becomes a puppet for rival factions? Henry has enemies in every shadow. Catholics who want Mary to restore Rome, Protestants who want a purer fire, and foreign powers who see a weak heir as an open door. France and Spain are watching like vultures, licking their lips. Henry tried to plan for this. He set up a regency council, 16 men, a mix of old allies and ambitious opportunists, meant to guide Edward until he came of age. On paper, it sounds wise. In practice, it's a cage full of cats with knives. Each man on the council has a secret agenda, and none of them want to share power. Edward will be their puppet. Maybe worse, their scapegoat. You lean against the wall, trying to imagine England under a child king. The same England that just a few years ago burned heretics in the street, dissolved monasteries, and executed queens like they were inconvenient birthday guests. It's not a land that does gentle transitions. This isn't a handoff. It's a baton dipped in poison. Fringe fact. Some nobles already started moving their chess pieces months ago. Letters written in invisible ink. Secret meetings under the guise of hunting trips. A few key players even began stockpiling arms. Not for civil war, not yet, but just in case. One ambassador to the Holy Roman Empire noted that the death of the king will be the spark that either purifies or incinerates the realm. The problem is, no one knows which, and you're not the only one who sees it. Henry, between bouts of sleep and incoherent prayer, occasionally mutters about betrayal. "I smell it on them," he says one night, his voice dry and, "Lo, they circle my son already. He's right. You know it. They know it. Even Edward probably knows it, though no one speaks to him directly about it. Too young, too precious, a porcelain prince. But Henry is determined to script this one last act. He signs more papers, names more officials, reasserts his supremacy in increasingly desperate tones. He's trying to control the future from a bed soaked with infection, trying to order the tide not to rise. Here's where historians can't agree. Did Henry's final plans actually matter? Some argue his will, signed with a dry stamp because he was too weak to grip a quill, laid out the transition clearly enough to avoid chaos. Others argue it was toothless from the moment he stopped breathing, that the real power vacuum began before his heart even gave out, that the council did what it wanted anyway, rewriting bits of the will posthumously. It's possible that parts of it were tampered with, subtle changes to dates and clauses, not proven of course, but not dismissed either. And still, every breath Henry takes feels like a postponement. The court holds its own breath with him. No one knows how to act until the crown is empty. The nobles jockey for position. The servants rehearse their reactions. The guards polish the swords they may need to use on each other. It's the most dangerous kind of waiting. Waiting with ambition. One night, Henry demands that Edward be brought to him. Not for ceremony, but something closer to confession. The child enters quietly, eyes wide, hair brushed to perfection. Henry, wrapped in layers of fur and fever, looks at him like a man gazing into the last mirror he'll ever see. He tells him to be strong, to listen to God, to trust no one completely. Then he adds, but be kind when you can. It's startling, not the kind of advice you'd expect from a king who signed death warrants like greeting cards. But maybe in this moment, Henry realises what a crown costs. Edward nods solemnly, but you can see he doesn't fully understand. How could he? He's a child about to become a god in the eyes of the law, and everyone around him will pretend it's normal, that he's ready, that this isn't madness. When Edward leaves, Henry doesn't speak again for hours. Maybe he's relieved. Maybe he's scared. Maybe he knows the moment he dies, the world he spent decades building will start unravelling like old embroidery. You wonder if he sees the irony. The man who tore down so many structures to remake England now can't hold the next piece in place. And you sit with that weight, with the dread of a nation about to be led by a boy, with the reality that power doesn't transfer neatly. It spills, it stains, it sparks. Because when a king dies, the blood doesn't stop flowing, it just changes hands. You're standing in front of an enormous wardrobe, massive carved oak doors, iron hinges, a musky scent of cedar and sweat-stained velvet wafting out. And inside, tucked between fur-lined cloaks and ceremonial armour, is a collection of codpieces that could practically have their own royal titles. Welcome to the strangest battlefield in Henry VIII's long, uncomfortable war, his obsession with masculinity. Tonight we're diving into the politics of the codpiece, the armour of ego, and the strange ways a man tries to prove he's still powerful when his body won't play along. First off, let's be honest. The codpiece isn't just a fashion statement, it's a declaration. A velvet-wrapped, jewel-encrusted, often absurdly padded piece of propaganda, saying to anyone who glanced, and everyone did, I am still a man. In Henry's case, a very important man. As his body expanded, his wounds deepened, and his royal duties slipped from his hands, the codpiece got bigger, literally. By the end of his life, it's less clothing and more architectural feature. There are reports that his tailors had to reinforce his outfits to support its increasing weight. Think about that. People physically supported the illusion of virility. But it's more than just his clothing. Henry's entire identity is tangled up in performance, of strength, dominance, fertility. When he was young, it was easier. He rode horses like a knight from legend. He jousted, wrestled, danced, even composed music. He had charm and calves that bards actually wrote about. That was the Henry who made England swoon. But over time, the legend inflated, even as the man inside it crumbled. Here's where the codpiece becomes almost tragic. Because as his health declines, his leg rots, and his marriages unravel, Henry leans harder into the show, the symbolism. He can't run a court anymore, so he builds bigger palaces. He can't produce more children, so he enforces elaborate rituals of fatherhood and divine masculinity. He insists on being addressed with full titles at all times. He orders new portraits, massive ones, where his legs are wide, his hand rests just above the codpiece, and his gaze dares you to question his power. You've seen that painting, haven't you? The one where he's standing square, legs apart, fists clenched, wearing enough fabric to choke a bear. That wasn't art. That was armour. Fringe detail. Rumour has it Henry once demanded a special throne cushion to elevate his posture during meetings, not for back support, but to create the illusion of a larger lap. Make of that what you will. There are no surviving records of the cushion's measurements, but you can imagine it wasn't subtle. There's also the matter of fertility, and this is where things get sticky. In Henry's world, a king's virility is tied directly to his legitimacy. You don't just need heirs, you need to be seen as capable of making them. Each time a wife fails to produce a healthy male child, it's considered her fault, officially. But you know how whispers work. Behind the curtains, the question shifts. What if the king is the problem? It doesn't help that his only living son, Edward, is sickly. Mary, the daughter of his first wife, was deemed illegitimate when Henry cast Catherine aside. Elizabeth, brilliant as she may be, came. From Anne Boleyn, the Queen accused of adultery, witchcraft, and everything short of tax evasion. So even his living children carry asterisks. Henry's throne is made of thorns, and it eats at him. That's why the codpiece gets bigger, why the robes get heavier, why the court poets start calling him the Lion of England, even as his roar turns into wheezing. It's all about drowning out the doubt, not just others, his own. Here's the scholarly debate of the day. Was Henry's obsession with masculine display strategic or compulsive? Some argue it was calculated theatre, a ruler using every tool of iconography and propaganda to secure his reign. Others think it was psychological compensation, pure and simple, a man terrified of weakness doing everything he could to pretend it didn't exist. Either way, it worked for a time. People feared him, respected him, obeyed him. But you can't codpiece your way out of organ failure. There's also his behaviour to consider. In these final years, Henry becomes more erratic, more easily insulted, and quicker to punish anyone who dares suggest vulnerability. One ambassador wrote that he raged like a bull over being addressed too softly, as if gentleness was an accusation. He replaces loyal servants with sycophants who praise his strength and never mention the growing smell or the fact that he's been hoisted into bed by 4 men for the past month. He even stages performances, literally. Court masks, elaborate shows where he plays the role of heroic king, God's chosen man, all-conquering father of the nation. Never mind that he can't remember half the lines. The audience claps anyway. You sit in the shadows watching him glow under torchlight, sweat pouring down his face, makeup covering the blotchy skin. The applause drowns out the rasp of his breathing. It's hard not to pity him in moments like these. You see a man who built a life around strength now terrified of his own weakness. You wonder how many other rulers have stared at the end and thought, but I was supposed to be invincible, and what about the codpiece now? Still there. Still enormous. He wears it even when bedridden, as if someone might walk in and judge the slope of the blankets. You can't help but laugh, just a little. Not cruelly, just that soft, sad laugh that comes when someone's tried too hard for too long. Fringe rumour. Some believed the king had a condition affecting his genitals, something that contributed to his infertility, his rages, and maybe even his leg ulcer. There's no medical confirmation, of course, but it was whispered about enough that foreign ambassadors reported it in code. The king is unwell in matters of nature, one letter read, a phrase that manages to sound both vague and ominously specific. But even if the codpiece was hiding pain, it was also projecting legacy. That's what Henry really cared about. Legacy. The idea that centuries from now, people would remember the man who stood tall, wide-legged, and unchallenged. Not the man who groaned in the night while servants soaked his sheets, and priests waited by the door. And now you sit in the corner of the king's chamber, looking at the garments hanging like ghosts on the wall, each with its own padded pride sewn in, and you understand something strange and deeply human. Henry wasn't just afraid of death, he was afraid of being forgotten as anything less than mighty. So, the codpiece remains. A ridiculous, tragic, glittering lie that dared anyone to tell the truth. The air is thicker tonight. No moonlight cuts through the curtains, no breeze stirs the heavy drapes, and the candles burn lower than they should, their wax puddling like silent tears across the cold stone floor. Something is happening. The whole room feels suspended, holding its breath along with every man, woman, and prayer within the palace walls. Tonight, you witness it. The long, slow, grotesquely human process of the death of Henry VIII. Sort of. You sit beside the bed, though no one sees you. You've become a silent observer, tucked somewhere between imagination and memory, watching one of the most powerful men in English history unravel molecule by molecule. And if you came looking for a clean, noble death, the kind kings are supposed to get, you're going to be disappointed. Henry's not dead yet, but he's circling the edge. He drifts in and out, sweat pooling beneath his neck, his mouth slack, his once sharp voice reduced to whispers, and the occasional slurred demand for water, wine, or Edward. His chest rises, then pauses too long, then jolts again. It's like watching a bellows that's forgotten how to breathe. A priest hovers just outside the door, clutching his copy of the last rites with fingers gone pale, but no one's called him in, not officially. Because here's the weird thing, Henry has forbidden anyone from saying he's dying. Out loud. Even now, even as the ulcers ooze through fresh sheets, even as his pulse stutters like a skipping drumbeat, no one is allowed to speak the words. To do so would be treason. So the court walks a tightrope of euphemism. His Majesty is fatigued. He requires peace. He is with God, but not gone, never gone. And that makes this whole process grotesquely slow. Every breath is a constitutional crisis. Every twitch of his hand sends ripples through the palace. courtiers whisper in hallways, wondering when to start mourning, when to start scheming. Ambassadors write draft after draft of dispatches that begin with, "It is with sorrow we report," and then cross the words out, because he's still not dead. One servant, pale and trembling, dares ask whether the Archbishop of Canterbury should be summoned. The room freezes. Henry's eyes crack open just enough to flash a warning. "I live," he croaks. And for the moment, he does. But the living part is technical. His leg wound has opened again, badly this time. The flesh around it has turned black in places. The smell, already a problem, has become unbearable. Someone has discreetly placed bundles of herbs beneath the bed to mask it, but they don't do much. A few of the younger pages have begun taking turns leaving the room to be sick in the corridor. You don't blame them. Here's the fringe detail no one likes to talk about. Royal doctors knew this was coming. Some believe Henry's condition crossed the line into fatal weeks ago, but no one dared to say it. Because to do so would mean dealing with the messy, politically dangerous moment of transfer. The very second Henry dies, everything changes. Alliances shift, wills are read, enemies resurface, and the dangerous limbo of regency begins. So, for now, the king is alive, because it's safer that way. But even pretending becomes harder as the hours drag on. His breath now rattles like wet paper. He stops responding to voices. His skin, once ruddy and flushed with meat and wine, has faded to an almost translucent grey. You can see his veins. They look like rivers on a dead map. And then, as if cued by some invisible orchestra, the chamber stills. Everyone present, doctors, servants, even guards, leans in just slightly. The king doesn't move, doesn't breathe. A pause, long, too long. The silence bends under its own weight. A physician steps forward, his fingers trembling, and gently places them on Henry's neck. Another pause, then Henry coughs, violently, grotesquely, and everyone jumps like they've been shot. Blood speckles the sheets. One of the ladies in waiting makes the sign of the cross. Another drops a tray. The moment passes, and the king mutters something unintelligible. He is still not dead. Historians still can't agree on exactly when he crossed the line. Some claim he died around 2 a.m. on January the 28th, 1547. Others say it was the day before or the morning after. The problem is no one in the room wanted to take responsibility for confirming it. They waited and waited, and when they were sure, really sure, they still waited another day before telling anyone. Why? Politics. Absolute, raw, Tudor panic. The death of a king isn't just a moment, it's a power vacuum, and Henry knew that. That's why he kept pushing himself to breathe a little longer, why he lashed out at anyone who approached with oil or scripture. He wasn't just clinging to life, he was clinging to control. Fringe theory? Some say he planned this delay, that he instructed his closest advisors to keep his death quiet until the political pieces were locked into place. Edward's council, the sealed letters, the key power players safely aligned. It would be very Henry to try and rule from beyond the grave. Here's the scholarly debate. Was this drawn-out death purely the result of poor medicine and royal denial, or was it a calculated, almost theatrical delay orchestrated by Henry or his circle? Was the man dying slowly, or was the legend stretching itself one last time, refusing to exit stage left? Some lean toward chaos, others toward cold-blooded choreography. There's evidence for both. But finally, after all the wheezing and coughing and clawing towards some half-remembered version of life, it ends. Sometime in the dark hours of the 28th, Henry takes his last breath, and no one announces it. Not for a full day. The most powerful man in England dies quietly in a darkened room, with sweat on his brow, pus on his sheets, and fear in the air. You sit there a moment longer, looking at the body that once launched wars, shattered religious systems, and turned love into a political weapon. It doesn't look like a king anymore, just a man who lived too large and couldn't make peace with the silence that follows. Outside, the bells are still quiet, the sun hasn't risen, and somewhere in the shadows of the palace someone is already running to tell Edward. The body lies untouched for hours, not out of reverence, mind you, but because no one knows what to do. Officially, Henry VIII is still at rest. The king is dead, yes, but only in the privacy of whispers and exchanged glances. No bells toll, no public mourning begins, no declarations are made. The palace has entered a state of suspended disbelief, as if the whole place might collapse the second anyone utters the truth, so they don't, not yet. You think royal death came with a plan? It doesn't. There are protocols, yes, pages of them, dusty and dramatic, but none account for a situation like this. A rotting monarch whose death is being hidden by the people paid to worship him. So the body just lies there. And the thing about corpses, especially royal ones preserved by fear more than science, is that they change. Quickly. By the second day, the stench is undeniable. The herb bundles under the bed are replaced hourly, but they barely help. The windows stay shut because winter air might draw suspicion. The fire is kept burning, even though it turns the room into a sweaty tomb. No one dares speak of embalming yet, not until the official announcement is made, so the flesh continues to soften, the wound continues to ooze, the mouth, already slack in life, sags open like a broken hinge. And then something happens. According to at least one historical account, one of those half-whispered, half-discredited details that historians like to raise an eyebrow at, the king's body begins to rupture, slowly at first, a subtle swelling of the abdomen, a wetness in the sheets that wasn't there before, and then, sometime during the night, a tearing sound, a bloated groan from the corpse itself. The stories differ. Some say it was a full rupture, others say just a seepage. But the image stuck, the once great king, bursting open in the night like a rotten fruit. The symbolism practically writes itself. A fringe but persistent rumour claims that as Henry's body began to bloat and split, a puddle of fluid seeped from the coffin and onto the floor of the chapel, where it had been temporarily placed. The next morning, a servant found a dog, stray or belonging to someone important, the story changes, licking at the liquid. He was chased away, but the image never quite faded from the minds of those who saw it. A dog lapping at the remains of England's lion. For some, it was a final humiliation. For others, a divine judgment. This macabre moment ties back to something more ancient. You remember the prophecy, don't you? It's brought up again now, in whispers, as people try to make sense of this grotesque final act. A medieval legend, supposedly from a monk or a mystic, again the records are unclear, claimed that a great king of England would die as he lived, full to bursting, and beasts shall sup at his fall. Sounds suspiciously poetic for something recorded centuries prior, doesn't it? And yet, the image sticks, because it feels true. Whether it happened or not doesn't matter as much as the fact that people believed it did. You lean in closer to the body, now wrapped but still leaking slightly through its linens. His face is bloated, the eyes sunken, the nose flattened by the pressure of time and fluid. This isn't just a corpse, it's a warning. Of power overreached, of pride left unchecked, of a man who believed the world would stop spinning when he stopped breathing, and then watched as it didn't. Here's the historical debate. Did Henry's body actually rupture, or was this the exaggerated reporting of an already suspicious court trying to frame his death as divine commentary? There's no autopsy report. Of course there isn't. Tudor England didn't do those, especially not for kings. But there are enough hints in ambassadorial letters and private court records to suggest something went very, very wrong. Not medically wrong, symbolically wrong. The kind of wrong that leaves a stain in more ways than one. Either way, damage control began immediately. The coffin, made of thick lead, was quickly sealed. Not for protection, but containment. Embalmers finally entered, working under full cloth wrappings soaked in perfumes and vinegar. The corpse was salted and stuffed and blessed, then stuffed again. Frankly, it was more preservation by panic than by method. The goal wasn't to keep the body in good condition. It was to keep anyone from seeing how bad it had already gotten. The funeral plans kicked into high gear. The court, having waited the necessary day or two to pretend Henry was still living, finally made the announcement. Bells tolled. Priests sang. Nobles wept on cue. And Edward, now King Edward VI, was presented to the world as the heir. A child handed a country that had just lost the man who nearly tore it apart and rebuilt it in his image. But back in the now quiet chamber, where the fire has burned down to embers, the echoes of Henry's final days linger. The sweat-stained sheets, the twisted pillows, the faint impression of his body still in the mattress. It doesn't look like a place where a god king died. It looks like the aftermath of a fever dream. Fringe detail? The chapel floor where the coffin temporarily rested was later scrubbed so thoroughly that the stone began to wear unevenly. A small dip remains. Some claim it's the mark of the leakage. Others just say it's where the pallbearers stood too long. But it's there. You can visit it if you like. Not many notice. Not many look down when history asks them to look up. You step out of the room now, your nose still catching hints of the decay, your mind filled with images you weren't supposed to see. The king is gone, the body is boxed, the lies are polished and ready to be recited at the funeral. But the truth remains. Henry VIII did not go quietly. He did not go cleanly. He did not go with dignity. He went like a man who had devoured too much of everything. Love, war, food, control, and who, in the end, could not contain what he had become. Now that the body is sealed in its coffin, and the court's facade of dignity is back in place, the real performance begins. You leave the dark, rancid bedchamber behind and step into the marble corridors, where fresh rushes have been scattered and courtiers adopt faces of sombre resolve. From the outside it looks like the kingdom has entered mourning. But if you listen closely, underneath the black silk and bowed heads, you can hear something else entirely. A quiet scramble, 1,000 whispered calculations. Because Henry VIII is dead, and England is suddenly a very dangerous place to have an opinion. The court becomes a stage, and everyone's playing a role. You pass ladies in waiting whose eyes are too dry to match their sobs, noblemen who lower their voices just enough to sound loyal without sounding uncertain. Behind closed doors, gloves come off. Alliances are shifting like tectonic plates. It's like someone cut the brakes on a wagon full of ambition, and no one's pretending they don't want the driver's seat. Henry's death hasn't brought stillness. It's unleashed a storm everyone was pretending wouldn't come. And at the centre of that storm, the coffin. Or rather, the idea of the coffin. You might expect it to be displayed somewhere grand, regal, majestic. Maybe Westminster Abbey surrounded by candles and choirs. But no, not yet. The location is kept secret for days. Only a small circle knows where the body is being held, and they guard that knowledge like it's currency. Because here's the truth the public doesn't know. The body cannot be moved until the political chessboard is locked into position. You hear it in coded conversations. The lion rests in shadow, one courtier says. Another nods, and they move on, speaking of nothing but weather and wine. The phrase spreads like a watchword. Everyone knows what it means. Henry is gone, but the world must act like he isn't. For now. The council, Henry's hand-picked group of advisors meant to guide young Edward, is already fracturing. They meet inside chambers lit by too many candles and argue about foreign policy, while pretending they're simply planning the funeral. Each man believes he has a claim to the king's favour, even in death. One lord wants to immediately recall Mary to court. Another demands she be kept at a distance until Edward is safely crowned. One calls for increased taxes. Another hisses that the people will riot. And all the while the body waits, wrapped, boxed, still. But not yet at rest. The smell has been contained. Barely. The lead coffin was Henry's own idea. A practical concern wrapped in superstition. He had ordered 2 of them prepared years earlier. One for himself, and one for Jane Seymour, the wife he considered his true queen. They now sit side by side in a dark vault beneath St. George's Chapel, but back then Jane's waited empty. Henry's, though, wasn't quite ready. Some reports claim the inside wasn't fully lined, that workers were summoned late at night to finish soldering the edges. That hot wax was poured between the layers to form a better seal. It's all disturbingly hands-on for a royal death. And yes, the coffin had to be reinforced again, because despite their best efforts, the king's body still threatened to betray them. The lead was thick, but the gas build-up. Thicker. No one says it aloud, but there's tension every time they walk past it. You wonder if they half expect it to thump. Or worse, speak. Fringe fact. A few years later, a similar coffin meant for another royal figure was reused for a lesser noble. Some claimed it had originally been Henry's spare. Its lining had a strange residue. You do the math, and then comes the journey. When it's finally safe, politically, not biologically, the coffin is moved. Slowly. Reluctantly. From Westminster to Windsor, through villages draped in black and guarded by soldiers who don't know what they're protecting. The procession is grand, yes. Hundreds of mourners, horses dressed in sable cloth, banners flapping with Henry's coat of arms. But there's an odd stiffness to it. No one mourns a tyrant naturally. They mourn a symbol, a throne, a future that's now the past. One chronicler noted that the streets smelled of smoke and wine, and not incense, that the people watched but did not weep. Maybe it was the cold, maybe it was the memory of taxes, or the memory of wives. As the coffin rolls along the frostbitten roads, priests chant the usual Latin requiems, but they've been rehearsed too many times. You hear the boredom in their voices, and over it you hear something else. The silence of a man who once commanded every room, now commanding nothing but wind. Here's where it gets strange. During the journey, the coffin is said to stop at Sion Abbey for a night. A former religious house, Henry himself dissolved during the dissolution of the monasteries. Poetic, isn't it? A king who destroyed monasteries now resting inside one, if only briefly. A few servants refuse to enter the room where the coffin is stored. One claims he hears whispering in the middle of the night. Another claims the floor beneath the coffin is wet. Rumour has it that the blood seeped again, that something oozed out between the joins. Officially, it's dismissed. Condensation, they say. But unofficially, the whispers start to churn again. That prophecy, that idea that the king would burst, that his death would mirror his reign, excessive, ugly and impossible to hide. Debate still rages among historians. Was the coffin defective? Was the body poorly prepared? Or was it all metaphor dressed up as record? There's no way to know now, but the details survive in the margins of letters, in the footnotes of funeral accounts. No one puts it in the official programme, of course. But the truth has a way of leaking through. And so, as the coffin continues its slow crawl toward final burial, you watch the kingdom prepare to breathe again. The people line the streets, some bow, some pretend not to see. Behind every curtained window someone is wondering, will the next king be better? Will the country be spared another Henry? And standing behind them, always just out of view, are the men already sharpening their knives and planning new crowns. Because when kings die, especially the kind who burn churches and break hearts, they leave behind more than policies and children. They leave power gaps. And power gaps attract the worst kind of people. And yet, in this moment, all of England must pretend that everything is fine, that a nation hasn't just been orphaned by its maddest father, that a leaking coffin isn't a symbol, that what comes next isn't going to be worse. You walk beside the coffin a while longer, listening to the sound of the wheels crunching over gravel, wondering how long it'll be before this funeral becomes a memory. Or worse, an opening chapter. The procession ends, but the unease doesn't. Henry VIII has finally been buried, or so they say. Beneath the flagstones of St. George's Chapel at Windsor, in a vault meant to hold not only his body but his legacy, lies the most feared and revered king in English history. But even as the funeral banners fall and the last Latin prayers echo off the chapel walls, there's a chill settling over the realm that no cloak or crown can shake. It isn't grief, it's something darker, something cursed. You start to notice it in the timing. Within days of Henry's death, things begin to unravel. Not dramatically, not all at once, but with the creeping certainty of rot beneath fresh plaster. His council, assembled to protect young Edward and uphold Henry's sacred vision, fractures almost immediately. The moment the king's coffin hits the crypt, the knives come out. Figuratively for now, Edward Seymour, Henry's brother-in-law, wastes no time elevating himself. He declares himself Lord Protector, brushing aside the idea of an equal council like it's yesterday's meat pie. The other nobles, caught off guard, don't stop him. Yet. But it's more than politics. It's the atmosphere. Something has shifted. The skies over London darken early. The Thames swells and turns murky. Ships crash at dock with alarming frequency. Superstition takes hold fast. People whisper that the earth itself has rejected Henry. That the dead king, so desperate to preserve control, has left something behind. Some residue of rage that lingers like bad smoke. And that's when the Henry curse begins to circulate. Not as a joke, not even as a rumour, as a warning. At first it's dismissed. One monk at a rural abbey, formerly dissolved by Henry's orders, claims to have seen the face of the king in a church window, reflected where none should be. He calls it a sign of divine unrest. He's silenced within a week. But others pick up the thread. A woman in Kent reports a vision of Henry riding a black horse through her village at midnight. A boy in Norwich claims the king appears in his dreams and bleeds from the eyes. In Wales, a field of crops mysteriously dies in the shape of a Tudor rose. Coincidence? Maybe. But the stories pile up. Some of these accounts are recorded in letters, tucked quietly into estate archives, and forgotten by all but the most curious historians. Others are oral, passed from servant to child to neighbour, warping as they travel but never quite disappearing. The message stays the same. Something about Henry's death is unfinished. Fringe detail. In the weeks after the burial, a strange problem arises in St. George's Chapel. The candles in the royal vault chamber refuse to stay lit. They're replaced. Still no luck. Then the oil lamps begin to crack. Glass breaking with no visible cause. A chaplain notes it in his journal. The king's soul does not rest well. The entry is scratched out, but not erased. It's easy to laugh it off. Kings die all the time. Sometimes the weather is just bad. Sometimes nobles just fight. But when you start connecting the dots, you notice a pattern of unravelling. The very systems Henry obsessed over, the Church of England, the royal succession, the unshakable image of monarchy, start to crumble almost immediately. Young Edward, sweet, pale and intelligent beyond his years, becomes a ghost of a king before he even grows into his crown. He's too sick, too shy, too surrounded by men who think they know better. His reign is filled with reforms no one understands and advisers no one trusts. Some say his constant illness is divine punishment. Others whisper that it's Henry's fault, that whatever was eating him from the inside didn't stop with death. It simply moved into the boy. And Mary, the Catholic daughter of Catherine of Aragon, Henry's first discarded wife, returns with fire in her eyes and a promise to undo everything her father did. When she takes the throne in 1553 after Edward's death, she burns Protestants in public squares. Literally, hundreds of them. Men, women, the elderly, sometimes entire families. She believes it's justice. She believes it's God's work. But others say it's something else, that the curse of Henry's kingdom has simply changed hands. One courtier famously wrote that England is a sick body and the ghost of the king is its fever. It's a poetic diagnosis, but it hits uncomfortably close to home. Because it isn't just the monarchs who suffer, it's the land. Famines spread, uprisings break out, the economy stutters. For decades after Henry's death, England lurches from one crisis to another. Every time someone tries to steady the ship, something breaks. Here's the scholarly debate. Is it really a curse, or just the inevitable fallout of Henry's radical reign? Did he plant the seeds of collapse through his dismantling of the monasteries, the chaos of his 6 marriages, and his constant political flip-flopping? Or is there something more uncanny at work? A national psyche too scarred to recover? Historians love to roll their eyes at the idea of a curse, of course, but they don't deny the pattern. It's undeniable, and when patterns start to behave like fate, people stop looking for rational explanations and start burning herbs. And maybe they're not entirely wrong. Because when you stand in that chapel, next to the sealed tomb, you can feel something. Not a presence, not a voice, just a weight. A thick, invisible pressure that makes your chest tighten and your eyes water. Some call it awe, others dread. And you remember what Henry said in his last lucid days, how he feared not death, but irrelevance. How he wanted to be remembered as England's greatest king, even if it meant being feared. And maybe, just maybe, this is how he got his wish. Not through glory, not through pageantry, but through haunting. The Henry curse, then, isn't just a superstition. It's a legacy that won't stay in the ground. A country that was ruled too hard, too long, by a man who couldn't stop pushing, even when his body fell apart. Even when his soul, possibly, never quite made it out of his lead-lined box. So the bells have stopped ringing and the flowers have wilted. The official mourning is done, but the real grief is just beginning. Because it turns out burying a king is easy. It's what comes after that gets messy. The shadow of Henry VIII stretches far beyond his grave, and the first to step directly into it is his son, Edward VI, the boy king, 9 years old with a waxy complexion, and eyes too tired for someone who should still be learning multiplication tables. You meet him in a quiet room filled with books and political advisors, and already it's obvious he's not really a child. Not anymore. Because when your father is Henry VIII, and your birth is the culmination of years of executions, divorces, and national schisms, you don't get to be ordinary. You don't even get to blink without someone calling it divine omen or royal illness. The coronation is rushed, and you can feel it. Not in the pageantry, because that's flawless, but in the energy behind it. Desperate. Performed at full volume. Edward is hoisted up, crowned, and paraded before the people, while half the council is already elbowing each other behind the scenes. The crown doesn't fit properly, he's too small. A bishop props it in place with hidden cushions. No one mentions it, but you see it wobble as he walks. And the thing is, Edward's brilliant. He really is. He reads Latin like it's bedtime poetry. He writes treatises on theology before he's old enough to shave. But brilliance isn't the same as power, not in a court filled with vultures. And right now, the biggest, hungriest vulture of all is his uncle, Edward Seymour, now styled Duke of Somerset and Lord Protector. The title's meant to be a temporary stewardship, but Seymour treats it more like an invitation to rule in the boy's name, and when convenient without his input. Within months the council splinters into factions. Some want to push Edward into a puppet role, appearing at events, signing papers, but staying out of decisions. Others whisper that he's the next Solomon, touched by God and destined to reform the realm. Meanwhile, Edward himself is watching all of it, listening, learning, and writing it down. He keeps a journal, neat, tidy, coldly observant. He records deaths, rebellions, and court gossip like someone filing a tax report. No emotion, just facts. He's his father's son, but wrapped in a quieter, more clinical skin. Here's the kicker. Edward is fiercely Protestant, raised on the new church Henry built but didn't fully understand. While Henry swerved between old and new, keeping Latin in the liturgy, rejecting the Pope but not all Catholic rituals, Edward doesn't waver. He wants reform. Real reform. Statues smashed. Latin gone. Priests married. Churches stripped bare. He sees it as purifying England, making it clean and godly again. Fringe fact. Edward allegedly referred to the Mass as the popish invention of idle bellies. Not exactly bedtime language, but it shows how deeply he drank the reformer's Kool-Aid. His godfather was Thomas Cranmer, Archbishop of Canterbury, and author of the Book of Common Prayer. Under Edward's short reign, that book becomes law. And with it, England's identity starts mutating again. But the cost? Oh, it's steep. You travel with Edward's government into the countryside and see it firsthand. Riots, armed rebellions. One of the worst is the Prayer Book Rebellion in 1549, where people rise up in Cornwall and Devon to protest the forced imposition of Protestant worship. They want their old Latin Mass, their saints, their comfort. They're told they're heretics. They're crushed, violently. Thousands die. Executions follow. And back in London, Edward writes it all down like he's checking off a grocery list. By now, the council is openly fighting. The Duke of Somerset grows paranoid. He fortifies his home, carries a dagger in his robes, tries to sideline his enemies with increasingly erratic decisions. Eventually it catches up with him. He's arrested, imprisoned, and executed. All while Edward watches from his study, chewing on theology and pretending not to feel anything. And into that vacuum steps another Seymour rival, John Dudley, the Earl of Warwick. Smooth, clever, calculating. He quickly becomes the new Lord President of the Council, but he's smarter than Somerset. He flatters Edward, lets him decide more things, plays the long game. Some historians say Dudley ruled England during this time. Others argue it was Edward himself pulling the strings. But by now the distinction is academic, because the boy is dying. You hear it first in his voice, thin, winded. He coughs more, needs rest after short walks. The court physicians call it a cold, then consumption, then possibly an inward canker. The records are vague, but the symptoms suggest tuberculosis. There's blood in his handkerchief, weight loss, sudden chills, and worse, he knows it. He writes about it, documenting his symptoms in calm, cursive handwriting, like he's writing about someone else. He's 13. Fringe theory? Some suspect foul play? That someone in court poisoned him to get rid of an inconvenient ruler, maybe to restore Mary, or to clear the way for Dudley's real ambition. But the evidence is paper thin. More likely, Edward was just born sick and slowly lost the war against his body. Like his mother, Jane Seymour, he was a candle lit too briefly. By 1553 he's clearly dying, and that's when the fear returns, fear of what comes next. Henry's will named Mary and Elizabeth as successors, in that order, if Edward left no heirs. But Edward doesn't want Mary, a Catholic, anywhere near the crown, nor does Dudley, so together they hatch a plan. Rewrite the succession. Replace Mary and Elizabeth with Lady Jane Grey, a devout Protestant and, oh yeah, Dudley's daughter-in-law. The legal gymnastics are wild. They claim it's what Henry would have wanted, that Mary and Elizabeth were illegitimate anyway. Edward signs it. Some say he was pressured, others think he did it gladly. Either way, it's the last major decision he makes. By the summer of 1553 he can barely sit upright. He dies at Greenwich Palace on July 6th. Barely 15. No marriage, no legacy. Just a kingdom left blinking and confused. Here's the debate. Was Edward a reforming genius cut down too soon, or just another pawn? Was he shaping England, or being shaped by those around him? The answer might be both. But either way, he dies quietly. No bloating, no bursting, no rumours of dogs at his coffin. Just a boy who tried to fix the soul of a country while his own lungs gave out. And you watch, from the edge of the crowd, as his death is announced. The people don't riot, they just shift their weight and wait to see who's next. Because in Tudor England, kings don't get remembered for how they ruled. They get remembered for what happens after. The crown lurches again, this time to a woman who had been waiting in the wings so long she'd practically become wallpaper. Mary Tudor, daughter of Catherine of Aragon and Henry VIII's firstborn child, steps forward like a figure carved out of grief and fire. You see her, veiled in black, riding through London with a solemnity so heavy it bends the air. Her father tried to erase her. Her brother tried to bypass her. But now, after years of exile, fear, and whispered masses in private rooms, Mary is queen, and she's absolutely done playing nice. Of course, there's a hiccup first, a dramatic one. When Edward dies, the Dudley faction, those charming political termites from earlier, attempts to install Lady Jane Grey, Edward's hand-picked Protestant successor. Jane, all of 16 and horrified to be on the throne, is declared queen for exactly 9 days. 9. A work week. Mary, meanwhile, rallies supporters across the country like a medieval Beyoncé. Nobles switch sides, militias march. People in villages say they see omens. Flocks of birds flying east. A rainbow in the shape of a crown. Whether divine signs or PR stunts, it works. Mary rides into London victorious. Jane is deposed, imprisoned, and eventually beheaded. And that's when the fires start. You've heard the name, Bloody Mary. Not just the cocktail, not just the schoolyard chant whispered in bathroom mirrors. This is the woman behind it. And to be fair, she didn't start out planning to be a killer. She actually begins her reign with promises of unity, of healing the nation, but somewhere between reunite England with Rome and restore the true faith, something breaks. Or maybe something snaps back into place. Mary had watched her mother discarded, had lived half her life declared illegitimate, and had practiced her Catholicism in secret, while Protestantism spread like wildfire. Now she's on the throne, and she intends to fix everything, with matches and kindling if necessary. The first fires ignite in 1555. Heresy trials begin. The accused are interrogated, then brought before the court, then, if unrepentant, sent to the stake. It starts slowly, a dozen here, 2 dozen there, but then the numbers rise. Whole groups are rounded up. Old priests, midwives, merchants, even teenagers. In total, around 280 people are burned under Mary's reign. Publicly, in marketplaces, before breakfast sometimes. And you're there, in the crowd, whether you want to be or not. Because public executions are required attendance. You smell the pitch and ash. You see the flinches, the prayers, the way some onlookers pretend to cheer while others turn away. Some cry, some take notes, and others, they just watch. Fringe detail? Among those burned are Hugh Latimer and Nicholas Ridley, 2 prominent Protestant bishops. As the flames rose, Latimer reportedly shouted to Ridley, "Be of good cheer, Master Ridley, and play the man. We shall this day light such a candle by God's grace in England as I trust shall never be put out," which honestly deserves an Oscar for dramatic last lines. Mary, for her part, doesn't flinch. She believes this is salvation work, not cruelty, not vengeance, just the purging of spiritual infection. Still, the people start to murmur. Not at first, but over time, even loyal Catholics feel the weight. The executions aren't strategic anymore, they're relentless. One chronicler writes that the very air in Smithfield smelled of scorched piety. Another, less poetic but more biting, simply asks, when will the Queen burn enough? It's not just about faith anymore, it's about fear. And that's where the Henry-shaped shadow returns, because Mary isn't just her mother's daughter, she's her father's too. The ruthlessness, the black and white morality, the obsession with legacy, it's all there, filtered through a rosary. She believes her father broke something sacred, and it's her duty to mend it, even if the stitching is done with fire. Of course, Mary has other issues, like being childless. She marries Philip II of Spain, handsome, powerful, devout. But the marriage is a political landmine. England doesn't want to be ruled by Spain. Mary doesn't want to be ruled by anyone. And worse, the marriage fails to produce an heir. Twice, Mary believes she's pregnant. Her belly swells, her cravings change, but no baby comes. Possibly phantom pregnancies, possibly uterine cancer. The second time, when her belly grows but no child appears, even her most loyal ladies-in-waiting exchange glances. And here's where the curse, or at least the trauma, starts to feel tangible again. Her father broke with Rome to ensure a male heir, then destroyed wife after wife chasing the illusion. Mary, now queen, attempts to reverse the damage, and still, the womb remains empty. The Tudor line is dying, literally. With every miscarriage, every failed swelling, the bloodline bleeds out. Fringe theory: some suggest Mary's health issues and mental deterioration toward the end of her reign could have been caused by porphyria, a blood disease possibly inherited from the Plantagenets. It would explain her insomnia, stomach pain, and paranoia. Others say it was pure stress, or divine judgment. Theories, 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 but no cure. As the fires burn and the air never comes, Mary fades. Not dramatically, not like Henry. No bursting, no leaking. Just a slow decline. Quiet, papery, bitter. She dies in 1558, at age 42, without a child, without a clear successor, and with a country ready to erase her name from every warm memory. And here's the debate that will never die. Was Mary a righteous reformer undone by a religious fanaticism? Or a traumatized woman wielding power the only way she knew how? By copying the father who never wanted her. Some say she was brave, others monstrous. But either way, she becomes a cautionary tale. You stand at her funeral, less crowded than Henry's, less dramatic than Edward's. There are no legends of dogs or bursting coffins, just a cold, quiet chapel and a crown that no longer fits anyone's head. The people mourn, sort of. Mostly they wait, because they know what comes next. The other daughter, the one no one planned for, the one who's been watching this whole time. She's been in the background for years now, observing, calculating, surviving with a kind of quiet brilliance that no one ever gave her credit for. But the moment Mary dies, and the crown is up for grabs once more, Elizabeth Tudor steps into the spotlight like she was born with a stage under her feet. Which, in a way, she was. Daughter of Anne Boleyn, that most scandalous of queens, and Henry VIII, England's self-made god-king, Elizabeth has been underestimated by nearly everyone, until now. And it's in that miscalculation that she finds her edge. You're there the day the council informs her of Mary's death. She's at Hatfield House, dressed in autumn colours, with a hawk perched on her wrist. She hears the news, and for a moment, just a flicker, something shifts behind her eyes. Not surprise, not grief. A kind of deep, exhausted readiness. "This is the Lord's doing," she says, "and it is marvellous in our eyes." Boom. First line as queen, measured, scriptural, unshakable, like she'd had it locked and loaded for years. The country, bruised and breathless after decades of royal whiplash, exhales. Finally, a monarch who isn't 9 years old, bleeding from the lungs or setting people on fire. There's hope and fear, because no one knows which Elizabeth they're about to get. The daughter of Anne, the Protestant reformer's child, Or the daughter of Henry who executed his friends and rebranded religion like a nervous marketer? Turns out she's both, but smarter. Elizabeth's coronation in 1559 is less about ceremony and more about messaging. She carefully walks the line between the Catholic and Protestant factions, offering just enough Latin to pacify the old guard and just enough English to promise change. She reintroduces the Book of Common Prayer, but tweaks it. She allows certain vestments to remain. She doesn't go full Puritan, not yet. Every decision is a needle thread between war and peace. It's not moderation, it's survival dressed as balance. One of her first acts is to declare that she will remain unmarried, that she is, in effect, already wed to England. It sounds romantic, almost mythical, but it's brutally practical. If she marries a foreign prince, England could become someone's colony. If she marries an English noble, factions would erupt overnight, so she chooses no one, or everyone, depending on how you spin it. Fringe detail: foreign ambassadors at the time constantly complained about Elizabeth's slipperiness. The Spanish called her the English Sphinx. She'd host dignitaries with dazzling smiles and poetic flattery, then deny everything they thought they'd agreed on by morning. Diplomacy as fencing match, and she was very, very good at it. But the shadow of her father never quite leaves the room. Henry's decisions are still echoing. Every piece of Elizabeth's legitimacy is questioned because of the way her mother was dismissed, accused, executed. Some factions still consider her a bastard, despite Henry reinstating her in the line of succession. Every letter she writes, every decree she signs, every public appearance is subtly defying the idea that she shouldn't exist. The early years of her reign are a delicate balancing act. England is broke. The navy is sad. France and Spain are flexing on either side. Scotland's a mess. And then there's Mary, Queen of Scots, her cousin Catholic, and by some standards more legitimate in the line of succession. Mary has the support of Rome, of France, of every English noble with a grudge against the Tudors. She's Elizabeth's walking, talking, perfume-drenched nightmare. You watch as Elizabeth juggles it all. She commissions portraits that show her as ageless, almost divine. She constructs a personality cult full of pageants, poetry and silk. She surrounds herself with brilliant minds. Francis Walsingham, her spymaster, who basically invents modern intelligence gathering. William Cecil, a pragmatic conciliere. John Dee, a mystic mathematician who advises her on astrology and empire. It's a royal Dungeons and Dragons party, and somehow it works. Fringe theory. Some scholars believe Elizabeth's persona, the Virgin Queen, Gloriana, the untouchable monarch, was a calculated response to her trauma. Daughter of an executed queen, survivor of prison under Mary, a woman who learned early that emotions got you burned, sometimes literally. So she constructs a mask so flawless that even now, centuries later, we're not sure who the real Elizabeth was. And she's not above ruthlessness. When Mary, Queen of Scots, finally becomes too dangerous, caught in a plot to overthrow Elizabeth, she's imprisoned for nearly 2 decades before Elizabeth signs the execution warrant. It's reluctant, sure, tearful maybe, but she signs it. And Mary's head comes off in 1587. Political poetry. The Catholic cousin, beheaded like Anne Boleyn, but this time by the daughter instead of the father. Here's where the debate gets spicy. Was Elizabeth's reign a golden age of peace and progress, or just a really well-curated illusion? She avoids war for decades, but when it comes, it's big. Like the Spanish Armada in 1588. England somehow wins. The fleet is scattered by clever tactics and favourable winds. Elizabeth gives one of her most famous speeches in armour. I may have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king. The crowd roars, the Armada sinks, and Elizabeth cements her myth. But myths have shadows. Religious dissent doesn't vanish. Poverty spreads. The latter years of her reign are full of anxiety, even as Shakespeare fills the Globe Theatre with poetry, and pirates return with plundered gold. The Queen grows old. Her face is hidden beneath layers of lead-based makeup. Her teeth blacken, her hair falls out. But she never shows weakness. Not once. Fringe fact? She had a ring, gold, set with a secret hinge, containing portraits of herself and her mother, Anne Boleyn. She wore it always, never showed it. But it was there. A silent tribute to the woman history tried to erase. A signal, perhaps, that Elizabeth never forgot who she was really avenging. She dies in 1603, at age 69, in a darkened chamber surrounded by shadows. No husband, no children, no designated heir, until the last moment, when she allegedly whispers James's name, James VI of Scotland, now James I of England, the son of the woman she executed, because irony, like history, doesn't care about your plans, and you stand at the edge of it all watching the end of the Tudor line. From Henry's bursting corpse to Edward's ghostly rule, to Mary's funeral pyres and Elizabeth's golden throne, it's over. The dynasty that changed everything dies with a woman who spent her whole life pretending not to bleed. But oh, how she ruled. Time passes as it always does, and the firelight of the Tudors fades into something quieter. Less flesh, more dust, but not gone. Never really gone. Because kings don't just vanish, they linger, especially kings like Henry VIII. And long after his children are buried, long after the last courtier who knew his voice has rotted away, people still ask, where is he now? Not spiritually, that's another debate entirely, but physically. What's left of him? What remains when you strip away the tapestries, the thrones, the myths? You walk slowly through the hush of St. George's Chapel in Windsor. Sunlight filters through stained glass, the air thick with incense and centuries. Beneath your feet lies the choir, a place of solemn grandeur. Beneath that, through a hidden stone slab near the altar, is the vault, a small, dark chamber. There's no sign, no plaque, no line of tourists snapping selfies. But this is where Henry sleeps, or rather, decomposes, alongside Jane Seymour, the only wife he didn't outlive. Fitting, in its own eerie way. The vault wasn't his first choice. Originally, Henry intended a massive tomb, a sculptural monument of bronze and marble to rival any Caesar's. He commissioned plans from Europe's best artists, including a young Italian sculptor named Benedetto da Rovezzano. The design? Breathtaking. Massive angels, scenes from his reign, allegories of justice, triumph, divine favour. It was meant to be housed in Westminster Abbey. Instead, only fragments of the unfinished tomb remain, scattered across museums, sold off over time, forgotten by everyone but a few feverish historians. Fringe detail: the sarcophagus originally intended for Henry now holds Admiral Horatio Nelson. Yes, that Nelson. Trafalgar Square Nelson. So if you're ever in St. Paul's Cathedral, looking at that fancy coffin beneath the dome, you're also looking at the ultimate Tudor hand-me-down. Imagine Henry finding that out. He'd have absolutely hated it. But what about the vault at Windsor, where his body actually lies? It's small, unceremonious, more pit than palace. There are no grand markers, just a simple stone laid down by William IV in the 19th century that reads, "In this vault are deposited the remains of King Henry VIII and Jane Seymour." He's not even alone. Two other royals share the space. Charles I, yes, the one who lost his head, and an infant child of Queen Anne, the Tudor king, the beheaded Stuart, and a baby. It's the strangest kind of royal roommate situation. You imagine the lead coffin down there, sealed tight, still heavy with time and secrets. Some say Henry's body was so badly decomposed when it arrived that even the vault couldn't contain the smell. There are stories, whispers, that it leaked again, seeped into the stone, the wood, the air. No documentation proves it. But again, with Henry, myth clings like mould. Scholars still debate whether he should be exhumed, not for scandal, or not just for scandal, but for science, to confirm cause of death, to analyse his bones, to settle once and for all whether it was syphilis, diabetes, Cushing's, or something rarer still that had made him. DNA testing could reveal his genetic legacy, or lack thereof, but so far no one dares dig him up, because permission isn't enough. What's at stake isn't just remains, it's myth. England has long preferred its kings dead and undisturbed, and yet pieces of him have surfaced, little relics, possibly. One researcher claims to have found fragments of cloth used in the original burial, preserved in a bottle at an old estate. Another points to a bit of stone flooring said to have absorbed the king's final moisture. Even more dramatically, there are rumours, fringe of course, that a tooth of his survives in a private collection, passed down through generations of a family whose ancestors served in the Windsor vault. You want to dismiss it. You do. But then again, you've seen how people hoard history like dragon gold. Fringe theory: a few amateur archaeologists believe Henry's body was never placed in the Windsor vault at all, that it was temporarily moved during a 17th century chapel renovation and never returned, that the coffin we think is Henry's might contain someone else, or no one at all. It sounds absurd. It is absurd. But stranger things have happened in royal history. Just ask the two princes in the tower. But whether he's there or not, something of him lingers. You feel it as you stand in the chapel's quietest corner. The dust settles differently. The shadows hold their breath. A sense, not of presence exactly, but of weight. As if his story presses down through the stone, trying to remind you. He was here. He mattered. And the strange thing is, he did. Even now, centuries later, we still build stories around him. The man who split his country in 2, then 3, then 4. The man whose 6 marriages are taught in rhymes, whose bloated corpse launched 1,000 conspiracy theories. He may not have built his tomb, but he built something harder to erase. A legend so tangled in blood and politics and rot that even now we can't quite stop looking at it. Here's the scholarly question that refuses to rest. Should Henry be reinterred with greater honour, moved to Westminster perhaps, where so many other monarchs lie, or left alone in that shadowed pit with his 3rd wife and a beheaded king? Some argue he deserves grandeur, others say he got exactly what he earned, a forgotten corner and a quiet stone. No final glory, just gravity. You linger a while longer before leaving the chapel, feeling the weight of centuries in your bones. You imagine what might be left of him in that box, fragments of femur, a handful of teeth maybe. And that leg, the infamous leg, curled in on itself like a grotesque signature. No fanfare, no music, just a vault, sealed and silent, a place where a king keeps his secrets one layer of dust at a time. You're walking through an old church, one of those weathered little English chapels with lichen-covered stones, crooked gravestones tilting like old men, and walls that seem to hum with damp stories. The kind of place that's been half forgotten by time, tucked at the edge of a village that's more sheep than people. Nothing suggests anything remarkable here. Nothing says, a piece of a king might be hiding in this wall. And yet, it is. We're in Basing, Hampshire. The year is 1856 and renovations are underway at the Church of St. Mary. Builders are chipping away at part of a disused alcove when they make a discovery. A human leg. Just one. Carefully wrapped. Hidden behind a slab of stone that hadn't been moved in centuries. No coffin, no markings, just a lone leg, embalmed and bound in fabric that looks, somehow, expensive. Forensics, of course, don't exist yet. But the questions fly fast. Whose leg is this? Why was it sealed away? And why does it look royal? The theory builds quickly. It's the leg of a king. Not just any king either. The king, Henry VIII. People start connecting the dots. There were stories, after all. Tales of his body being transported, of leaks, of sudden stops along the route to Windsor, of temporary burials, of mistakes. And suddenly this leg, fleshless, discoloured and ominously intact, feels like a puzzle piece that was never meant to be found. You lean closer, the cool air of the church curling around your neck. Imagine the moment they unwrapped it. The look on the vicar's face, the sudden silence. Even in the age of empire, when bones of saints and soldiers turned up regularly, this one stood apart. A leg with presence. A leg with history written in every inch of shriveled muscle and bone. Now, of course, we've got questions. Tons of them. Could it really be Henry's? Did someone remove his leg post-mortem? Did it fall off? Was it buried separately? Or, and this is the favourite among fringe theorists, was it amputated before death? A final act of desperation to save the king from infection? There's no record of it, naturally. But records from his final days are already sketchy. And people love gaps. Gaps are where legends grow like mushrooms. Here's what we do know. Henry's leg was famously, horrifically infected. Possibly gangrenous. Possibly necrotic. By the end of his life it smelled like death. Oozed constantly. And required daily dressing changes that filled entire basins with fluid. If the infection spread, and it clearly did, amputation might have crossed someone's mind. Even in a world with medieval tools and questionable pain management. Desperate kings make desperate patients. It's not impossible, just unlikely. But then again, Most of Henry's life was a series of unlikely turns held together by ego and fat. Fringe detail: the town of Basing had close connections to the Tudor court. The nearby Basing House was one of the grandest private homes in England before it was destroyed during the Civil War. It entertained royalty often. Could the body have stopped there en route to Windsor? Could the leg have been separated, perhaps mistakenly, during the process? If the coffin did, in fact, leak, if it ruptured en route, would someone have removed part of the body to preserve dignity? To prevent further damage? Of course, scholars are sceptical. The idea of a royal limb going rogue sounds more Monty Python than academic paper. But the timing, the location, and the sheer weirdness of it all make people lean in anyway. Over the years, the leg in the wall gets forgotten again, only to reappear in ghost stories and local pub tales. Some say it was reburied quietly, others claim it was taken to a museum and mislabeled. There's even a whisper that a retired physician kept it in a case, just in case someone ever wanted to match it to a royal DNA sample. Which, let's talk about that. DNA, the golden ticket of modern history solving. Could a leg, well preserved, embalmed, protected from the elements, yield enough genetic material to prove a match to the Tudor bloodline? Possibly, but there's a catch. We don't have verified DNA from Henry VIII, not yet. His tomb remains sealed, his remains untouched. Without a confirmed sample, any rogue leg, no matter how regal, stays unconfirmed. And here's the debate. Should we open the tomb, crack that lead coffin, examine the bones, confirm the diseases, the injuries, the lineage? Some say yes. Think of what we could learn. Others argue no. He's earned his rest, however toxic and bloated it may be. The leg for now floats in this purgatory of maybe history. But the story lives on. Every few years the leg resurfaces in articles and documentaries. Historians argue on Twitter, archaeologists make polite disclaimers, and local guides in Hampshire grin when they tell tourists, you know, we might have a piece of Henry in the wall. And honestly, maybe that's the best kind of historical ghost, the one you can never quite pin down. Because let's be honest, it would be like Henry to leave a limb behind, wouldn't it? To be so large, so heavy with legend, that even death couldn't hold him all in one place. To haunt not just a chapel floor in Windsor, but a wall in a forgotten church like a secret chapter trying to write itself. You step back from the spot where the leg was found, the cold stone brushing your fingertips. You imagine him, the king, carried by torchlight through the dark countryside, groaning inside his coffin, still rotting, still oozing. Maybe the cart jolts. Maybe something gives way. Maybe someone mutters a prayer and makes a decision that no one ever writes down. That's how history works. Sloppy, imperfect, human. And somewhere, beneath all that royal flesh and ambition and codpiece sculpted masculinity, there's a simple, stupid truth. Even kings fall apart. Sometimes in public, sometimes in pieces. You're at the edge of a trench now, but this one isn't filled with mud and blood. It's stacked with rumours, whispers, and half-dug holes. The ground here isn't soft with dirt. It's dense with centuries of royal mystery. Because long after Henry VIII was sealed up and slotted into a vault, beneath the floor of St. George's Chapel, people started looking for him. Again and again. Some with shovels, some with microscopes, all of them chasing a question too tempting to leave alone. Could we actually find Henry? Not just the myth, the man, the bones, the body, the truth. Welcome to the strange world of royal corpse hunters. You might imagine something glamorous, trench coats, torches, historians muttering over ancient maps. And sometimes that's not far off, but most of it, bureaucracy, frustration. A lot of people in fleece jackets begging archivists to open sealed files or local councils to approve excavation permits. Because you can't just go digging up Windsor Castle, not unless you want a strongly worded letter from every royal historian and the Church of England at the same time. Still, that hasn't stopped the curious. It began, as these things often do, with a footnote. In the 1800s, a document surfaced describing an iron-bound coffin found during renovations in the chapel. It was misidentified, first thought to be a later monarch, then dismissed entirely. But someone connected the dots. Could this have been his coffin? Could there be more than one? Was Henry moved, misplaced, forgotten? And just like that, the hunt was on. A small but vocal community of amateur historians took up the torch in the 20th century. Some had degrees, Some had metal detectors. One man, a retired dentist with a passion for Tudor history and extremely loose boundaries, claimed he'd identified a hollow resonance beneath a specific stone in the chapel floor, just left of the altar. He was escorted out before he could pull out his trowel. Then came the era of ground-penetrating radar, scanners that could peer beneath the stone without cracking it open. A few scans were authorized, quietly, cautiously, and what they found was unclear. There was a chamber, there was a mass. But could it be Henry? Could it be someone else? Could it be nothing but rock and rumour and the ghost of a desperate idea? Fringe detail? One researcher swore he picked up heat signatures from the floor above the vault, which, let's just pause for a second. Heat signatures? From a corpse that's been dead since 1547? It doesn't make sense, but the report exists. Filed, footnoted, laughed at, but still real. One explanation, equipment glitch. Another, divine irony. A final theory, that Henry's decay created a chemical legacy, some strange interaction of lead, fat and stone that produces residual warmth. Science says no, but science also hasn't opened the vault, and that's the sticking point. The vault. It's there. We know it's there. St. George's Chapel has confirmed it. Documents describe it. The stone slab that covers it is visible, albeit protected. But opening it, that's the hard part. The chapel is an active royal site. The Queen, or rather now the King, holds services there. Burials still occur. Prince Philip was placed just steps away in 2021. You don't exactly show up with a crowbar and a thesis. Yet every few years the campaign revives. A historian publishes a new book, a documentary airs, or a university floats the idea of a full forensic investigation. Let us finally confirm the cause of death, they argue. Let us study the DNA. Let us give the people the truth. And every time, the answer is the same. Not now. Some claim it's out of respect. Others say it's fear. Fear that the remains, if exhumed, will not match the myth. That he'll be smaller than expected. Or not there at all. That his bones will tell a story more mundane than monstrous. Or worse, that there won't be enough left to tell a story at all. There's a lingering suspicion among some researchers that the lead coffin has collapsed, that the body has liquefied into a sort of royal sludge, that the vault is now more biohazard than burial chamber. If true, opening it wouldn't solve a mystery, it would create a cleanup. Fringe theory. One wild account claims that during World War II, chapel caretakers secretly opened the vault during an air raid, just to check the status of the royal dead in case the building was bombed. It's said that they saw Henry's coffin, bulging, cracked, but left it untouched. This story appears nowhere official, but it shows up in letters, in whispered anecdotes from long-dead clergy, and in the footnotes of footnotes. And it lingers, so the vault stays sealed, for now. And yet, the obsession grows. Documentaries still bait audiences with lines like, "The secret grave of Henry VIII." Novelists write entire plots around stolen bones and DNA tests that reveal shocking truths. Online forums pick apart architectural blueprints like they're treasure maps. The fantasy isn't just about finding him, it's about solving him, about cracking open a coffin and seeing the truth with your own eyes, the man behind the legend, the corpse behind the crown. You stand above that vault now, or at least you imagine you do. The stone beneath your feet is cool, worn smooth by centuries of curious steps. You picture what lies beneath, a lead box in the dark, perhaps dented, perhaps empty, perhaps holding the last scraps of a man who broke a continent with his appetite. Maybe he's curled there, knees drawn up from decay, jaw hanging open in final defiance. Or maybe he's gone, reduced to dust, scattered in silence. And maybe that's the answer. Not a mystery to solve, but a reminder that even kings rot, that the biggest legacies leak into the earth, that sometimes history has the final word, and it's quieter than we expect. But still, you wonder, and you know you'll come back. Because even now, centuries later, Henry refuses to stay buried. You're in a dim, vaulted basement beneath St. George's Chapel, tracing your fingers along cool stone as the air thickens around you. The walls here don't echo. They remember. This isn't the public-facing part of the chapel, with its stained glass halos and choir boys singing like angels. This is below, where royalty meets rot, where the polished finish ends and the messy truth begins. And tonight, your guide is a coffin. A very specific one, made of lead, not marked, not exactly where it should be. Welcome to one of the strangest detours in Henry VIII's burial story, the coffin mystery. It begins, like so many good Tudor tangents, with something no one can explain. In the early 1800s, workmen performing renovations on the floor of the choir uncovered an old vault. Not exactly a shocking discovery, after all monarchs and nobles were buried here for centuries, but what they found inside raised more questions than it answered. There, lying undisturbed in a space no wider than a horse cart, were a few coffins. Among them, one long lead box, strangely unmarked, slightly dented, and unmistakably royal in construction. Initially, they assume it belongs to Charles I, who was hurriedly buried after his execution in 1649, and they're not wrong. He's in the vault. A skull with a clean slice across the neck confirms it. That's a whole other story. But this lead coffin, bigger, heavier, and showing signs of leakage. The assumption forms fast and quietly. This must be Henry. The position fits. The construction matches records. And yet, there's something off. The coffin appears to be damaged, slightly sunken in the middle, as if crushed by the weight of time or something inside trying to push out. There's an oily residue on the floor beneath it. The chapel dean overseeing the site makes no dramatic claims. He simply notes the condition in his records, then quickly reseals the vault. You might wonder, why not open it? Why not confirm the identity? But here's the thing. Even in the 1800s, they understand the weight of that act. Opening a royal coffin isn't just curiosity, it's provocation. You don't mess with a king, especially not that king, so they let it lie. But the seed of doubt is planted. Here's the fringe detail that makes things murkier. A coffin of nearly identical construction, same dimensions, same leadwork, was discovered around the same time in a different chapel far from Windsor. For years, it was assumed to be the temporary resting place of a noblewoman, but later documents hinted it had been repurposed from a more ambitious burial plan, and when scholars examined the craftsmanship, they noticed marks, faint, almost worn away, that matched the workshop commissioned by Henry VIII for his tomb. That's right, his unused tomb. So now we have two lead coffins, both possibly linked to Henry, both in different places, neither conclusively proven to hold his remains. One possibly his final resting place, the other maybe a trial run, or a backup, or just a coincidence born of a century that mass-produced royal death boxes like banquet napkins. It only gets weirder. In the mid-20th century, during minor repairs to the chapel floor, ground-penetrating radar picks up what appears to be another sealed chamber beneath the main vault. It's deeper, less defined. Could it be an older burial site, a duplicate vault, or just a natural pocket in the rock? No one investigates further. The floor is resealed. The conversation drifts back into the vault of not now, maybe later, and here's where the academic debates start getting spicy. Some scholars argue that Henry's coffin may not have been sealed at all for weeks after his death, that it sat open, partially covered, in a side chapel while plans were adjusted. If true, the body could have been moved, twice, or mixed up, or decayed so thoroughly that the coffin we think is Henry's might just be ceremonial, an empty shell meant to symbolise royal presence rather than preserve it. Others insist we're overthinking it, that the records are clear enough, that Henry is exactly where he's supposed to be, right there in the vault next to Jane Seymour, quietly marinating in his own royal juices. But even the confident ones have to admit, the coffin doesn't match the plan. Henry's grand tomb was never completed, but the coffin discovered doesn't even bear the markings you'd expect for a king of his stature. No nameplate, no engraving, just dull lead. Anonymous, undignified, almost like someone wanted to forget. Fringe theory. One researcher suggests Henry's remains were deliberately hidden, that after the English Civil War, with royal tombs desecrated left and right, loyalists moved his body, again, to protect it from vandals. The theory hinges on a few suspicious gaps in chapel ledgers from the 1640s, and a letter mentioning the most dangerous body beneath the floor. No one's confirmed what that means, or who wrote it. The Church of England, for its part, doesn't want this opened up. The royal household doesn't either. Their official stance is, let the dead rest. But unofficially, the tension's there. Every time a new scan is done, every time a new researcher points to the mystery coffin, the silence from above grows louder. And you, standing there now above the vault, feel that silence like pressure on your ribs. Below you may be the king who changed England forever. Or an empty coffin meant to keep his myth from leaking too far. Or even someone else entirely. A royal decoy. A substitute. An accident nobody wanted to admit. That's the thing about coffins. Until you open them, they're all Schrodinger's royalty. You crouch down, placing your palm flat against the flagstone. It's cool, solid, unmoving. But you can't shake the thought. Something down there isn't quite as sealed as they want us to believe. And the longer it stays closed, the louder the speculation becomes. Not just among scholars, but among the public. Because the coffin mystery isn't just about bones. It's about memory, about power, about who gets to rest and who keeps getting dragged back into the light. And maybe that's Henry's real legacy. A body so large, so heavy with consequence, that even death can't quite contain it. You wouldn't think fat would be a legacy. You wouldn't imagine that centuries after a king's final feast, historians and medical sleuths would still be arguing about his waistline, his glands, his glucose levels. But here you are, in the bizarre corner of Tudor scholarship where kings are measured not by their conquests or laws, but by inches and symptoms. Because it turns out, Henry VIII's body, his bloated, pus-leaking, furniture-crushing body, is still a riddle, and people really, really want to solve it. Let's start with what we know. By the end of his life, Henry was massive. Easily over 300 pounds. He required custom-made mechanical contraptions to help him mount stairs or get into bed. His armour, once sleek and heroic, had to be redesigned with bellied-out plates to accommodate the expanding royal torso. That famous Holbein portrait. It's propaganda, painted when he was already getting heavy, but before things got truly spherical. By the time he dies, he's not walking. He's being hoisted. But here's the thing. Henry wasn't always like this. In his youth, he was athletic, even dashing. He was tall for the time, broad-shouldered, muscular, and absurdly active. He jousted like a champion, hunted daily, wrestled, fenced, and even played tennis in full royal drag. Foreign envoys reported that his calves were marvels of symmetry. You know someone's in their prime when their legs make diplomatic reports. So what happened? That's the rabbit hole, and you're already falling in. One popular theory, an untreated leg injury changed everything. After a jousting accident in 1536, yes, the same year Anne Boleyn lost her head, Henry's leg was crushed under his horse. The wound never properly healed. Infection set in, a chronic ulcer formed. He couldn't ride, couldn't fence, couldn't do much besides eat, drink, and brood. Mobility dropped. Weight ballooned. The rot, literal and emotional, set in. But scholars today think it wasn't just the leg. There may have been something more fundamental going on, some rare condition that warped his body from the inside out. Let's talk suspects. First up, type 2 diabetes. It fits. The weight gain, the leg ulcer that wouldn't heal, the fatigue, the irritability, even the dental issues. His teeth were said to be black and painful in later years. Combine that with his sugar-heavy diet, remember he thought fruit was for peasants, and his relentless intake of beer and red meat, and you've got a textbook case. But no blood work, of course, just symptoms and speculation. Next, Cushing's syndrome. This one's juicier. Cushing's is a hormonal disorder caused by excessive cortisol, often due to a tumour in the pituitary or adrenal gland. It results in weight gain, especially in the trunk of the body, muscle weakness, high blood pressure, and, here's the kicker, dramatic mood swings. Rage, paranoia, depression. Sound familiar? Some historians swear this explains Henry's erratic behaviour in his later years. One moment he's dancing at court, the next he's signing off on a friend's execution with a half-eaten turkey leg in hand. Then there's McLeod syndrome, a rare genetic disorder linked to a mutation on the X chromosome. It causes neurodegeneration, muscle atrophy, and personality changes. It's often used to explain both his physical and mental decline, why he seemed to darken so rapidly after his 40s. Some modern doctors believe McLeod syndrome could explain the leg issues, memory lapses, aggression, and even the drooping of facial features seen in later portraits. The downside is very rare, like needle in a gene stack rare, but possible. Oh, and then there's syphilis, the classic historical scapegoat. For years, Henry was assumed to have had it. After all, he had dozens of lovers, a chaotic sex life, and several miscarriages with his wives, symptoms often linked to congenital syphilis. But modern scholarship leans away from this theory. No clear record of mercury treatment, a go-to remedy at the time, and many of the symptoms don't match the disease's progression. Also, syphilis usually gets blamed when historians get lazy. Fringe detail? One historian proposed that Henry suffered from a hormonal disorder caused by consuming too much lead, often found in pewter mugs, wine storage, and face powders of the time. Over decades, lead poisoning can cause neurological damage, irritability, and, you guessed it, weight gain. It's hard to test now, but it adds another layer to the portrait of a king poisoned by his own luxury. Here's the wild part. We might be able to prove some of these theories, if the vault were opened, if DNA were extracted, if bone density and dental records were examined. But as we've said before, that door stays shut, so instead the medical mysteries just swirl. Scholars argue over symptoms, biographers debate tone. Every new portrait that's scanned under infrared becomes another piece of forensic evidence. And here's the debate that never dies. How much did his body affect his reign? Some say Henry's weight and health had a direct impact on policy, that his paranoia and cruelty increased with his inflammation, that his lack of exercise fed depression, which in turn fueled rash decisions, that the discomfort of a festering leg made him more volatile, less patient, more inclined to lash out. That, basically, England suffered because its king was in pain and didn't have ibuprofen. Others argue that his body was a symbol of his rule, that the growing girth represented the expanding state, that his appetite mirrored his ambitions, that the very size of Henry became a form of control, intimidation by silhouette. He was England in all its excess, in all its contradictions. You stand now in front of a wax replica made from the best surviving measurements. It's part of an exhibit in a quiet corner of a London museum, mostly ignored except by schoolchildren and confused tourists. It's huge, shocking even. The belly juts, the arms puff out like stuffed sausages, the thighs could crush a man. It's not flattering, but it feels real. You look into the face, not angry, not smug, just tired. The kind of tired that goes deeper than muscle. You can almost hear the leg weeping beneath the velvet. So yes, Henry was fat, painfully, dangerously, world-changingly fat. But it wasn't just gluttony. It was genetics, it was injury, it was medicine and power and fear, and a country that fed him like he was a god. And like all gods, he decayed, slowly, spectacularly, in public. And even now, we're still trying to diagnose him, because sometimes the best way to understand history is through the flesh. Even when it's leaking, it's late, and the library's quiet enough that you can hear your own pulse. Just you, and the shelves and a stack of Tudor biographies thick enough to crush a foot if they fell the wrong way. You're hunting for the real Henry now, not the caricature, not the jester king of bloated legends and thunderous tantrums. You want to know the man, or at least the closest approximation history will allow, and spoiler, it's harder than it sounds. Because once you strip away the myth, what's left is a deeply unstable pile of contradictions, ambitions, and ghosts wearing velvet. Let's start with this. Henry VIII wasn't supposed to be king. His older brother Arthur was the heir. Arthur was groomed for the crown, schooled in diplomacy and Latin and ceremonial pageantry. Henry? He was the spare. More likely to end up a bishop than a monarch, a role meant to support the king, not become one. And then Arthur died. Suddenly, teenage Henry went from Plan B to destiny incarnate. Inheritance, power, and pressure all dropped into his lap like a flaming crown. He wasn't trained for it. He didn't expect it, but he wanted it. Badly. And that mix, entitlement without preparation, makes him one of the most fascinating monarchs in history. Because you can see it in everything he does. A boy trying to play the part of a man, then a god, then a legacy. Always reaching. And here's a thing not enough people talk about. Henry was smart. Genuinely. He spoke multiple languages. He read philosophy. He wrote music. He composed theological rebuttals to Martin Luther and got the Pope to call him defender of the faith, which is hilarious in hindsight considering how quickly he kicked the Pope to the curb. But intelligence alone doesn't make a good ruler. It just gives you sharper tools to stab people with. What Henry had in intellect, he lacked in impulse control. His court was a revolving door of favourites and scapegoats. Friends like Thomas More and Thomas Cromwell, who built his empire with legal genius, were discarded the moment they displeased him, or simply became inconvenient. He didn't just remove obstacles, he erased them. He ordered tapestries cut, portraits taken down, letters destroyed. He didn't like reminders, especially of people who said no. And then there's the wives. You know the rhyme: divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. But that jingle is doing a lot of work. Each marriage is its own power play, its own breakdown, its own attempt at rewriting destiny. He marries Catherine of Aragon to keep his father's treaty with Spain intact. When she fails to produce a male heir, he breaks from Rome to divorce her. Anne Boleyn, fiery and reformist, is the lightning bolt that changes everything, until she too fails to bear a son. Then she's executed, on laughably flimsy charges. Because again, saying no to Henry was a terminal decision. Fringe detail? Henry's fourth marriage to Anne of Cleves, his infamous Flanders mare, wasn't nearly as disastrous as it was made out to be. Yes, he found her unattractive. Yes, he had the marriage annulled. But she ended up with a generous settlement, a series of estates, and the distinction of being the only one of Henry's wives who both survived him, and never fell out of favour. They remained friends. He even called her sister. That's about as emotionally mature as Henry ever got, frankly. But here's where things really start to blur. How much of Henry's chaos was him, and how much was the system that allowed him to be that way? Because being king in Tudor England wasn't just about ruling, it was about being. You had to embody the state. Every decision, every public appearance, every performance of power had to reinforce the idea that you were England. If the king was strong, the country was strong. If the king faltered, enemies crept in. So when Henry's health declined, his ministers tightened the circle. They fed him curated news. They dressed his wounds, both physical and political. They made sure no one saw him as weak. But Henry was weak. Not just physically, emotionally, psychologically. And the further his body collapsed, the harder he gripped at control. That's why he rewrote his will obsessively. Why he planned his funeral down to the candle count. Why he left detailed instructions for Edward's education, Mary's containment, and Elizabeth's marginalisation. The tighter his grip, the faster everything slipped through. Fringe theory. Some believe Henry spent the last year of his life convinced he was being poisoned. Not metaphorically, but literally. That his food was being tampered with. That his inner circle was plotting against him. There are fragments of letters from court physicians suggesting unusual dietary restrictions. A sudden mistrust of wine, dishes being returned untouched. It never became a full-blown scandal. But it speaks to the paranoia that shadowed his final years. And here's the debate that divides even the most level-headed historians. Was Henry a visionary king who reshaped England forever, or just a tyrant who lucked into lasting influence? Yes, he gave England the Church of England. But was that reform, or just religious cosplay to secure a divorce? Yes, he modernised the bureaucracy. But was that good governance, or just ruthless efficiency? Yes, he presided over a cultural bloom. But most of that came from people he eventually executed or ignored. Even the English Navy, one of his proudest legacies, wasn't a new invention, just an old idea given more cannons. So maybe the best way to understand Henry isn't as a hero or a villain, but as a mirror. A man who reflected the worst impulses of power, dressed them in ceremony, and called them God's will. A man who needed to be remembered, even if it meant rewriting the rules as he went. Even if it meant becoming a monster in the process. You close the book. The library's darker now, shadows stretching across the shelves. Henry is everywhere and nowhere. Not in the tomb, not in the portrait, not in the myth. Just 1,000 questions stitched together by blood and ambition. And that's what makes him so endlessly fascinating. Not because he was good, not because he was terrible, but because he was terrifyingly human. Right down to the gout and the paranoia and the rotting leg. A man who wanted to be a god but ended up just another man buried under stone. Let's turn the lights down for this one because it's about to get weird. Not historically weird, not how did he fit into that armour weird, but full-on dim the lamps and whisper weird. Tonight, we're crossing the velvet rope into the world of spirit boards, psychic mediums, and royal seances. Yes, that's right. People are still trying to talk to Henry VIII, not through archives or DNA or architectural scans, but directly, with candles, with trances, with questions whispered into the beyond. Because if anyone in British history had enough ego to haunt a continent, it's Henry. So picture it. London, late 19th century. The spiritualist movement is in full swing. Mediums are popping up in parlours, summoning the dearly, or not so dearly, departed for audiences desperate for connection. Queen Victoria herself consults a few after Albert dies, and among the spiritual elite there's this strange fascination with royalty. Ghosts of queens, phantom kings, and always, always, Henry. One of the earliest reported Henry sessions comes from 1892. A medium named Georgiana Fanshawe claims she contacted the spirit of Henry VIII during a séance in Chelsea. Her account, recorded in a painfully Gothic journal titled Echoes from Beyond the Veil, describes Henry as boisterous, angry and reluctant to speak with women, which honestly just tracks. According to her notes, he kept interrupting with vague threats and incoherent mutterings about wolves, fire and fruit pies. Take that for what you will. The messages, such as they were, made little historical sense. Henry allegedly denied killing Anne Boleyn, claimed he had 7 wives, a bonus mystery bride, and referred to Edward VI as the weak one who wore his bones on the outside. Poetic. Nonsense, maybe, but poetic. Fast forward to the 1920s, peak Ouija board era, and Henry makes another spectral cameo. This time, during a session hosted by the London Society for Historical Inquiry and Apparitional Documentation, a group as serious as their name is long. They claim to have contacted multiple royal shades, including Richard III, Elizabeth I, and of course Henry VIII. The transcript, if you believe it, reads like a Tudor fever dream. Q. Do you repent? A. Only of wasting my fire on the wrong ones. Q. Which wrong ones? A. The ones who smiled when they shouldn't. Creepy. Vague. Very Henry. Now, was this the real ghost of a long-dead monarch? Doubtful. Was it someone's dramatic cousin channeling their flair for Renaissance drama after 3 glasses of port? Probably. But still, there's something compelling about the idea. The thought that Henry might still be lurking, somewhere in the static between worlds, thundering about betrayal and bad marriages and that damn leg. Fringe fact. In the 1970s, a small-town psychic named Mavis Holloway claimed she was possessed by the spirit of Henry VIII for 3 consecutive Tuesday evenings. During those sessions, she reportedly ate nothing but cold mutton, drank 2 pints of ale straight from the tankard, and once tried to execute the postman for delivering a late gas bill. Her neighbours were both horrified and impressed. She was later hospitalised for exhaustion, but not before giving several interviews in which she insisted the king still had unfinished business with Europe. So do we all, Mavis. And the stories haven't stopped. As recently as 2014, a paranormal YouTube team known as Spirit Track UK claimed to have captured EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, in the chapel where Henry's body allegedly lies. The recordings, which are mostly crackle and hiss, contain one eerie growl that vaguely sounds like the word divorce. Coincidence? Yes, definitely. But internet comment sections lit up with speculation. Was Henry angry, restless, still trying to control his legacy from beyond the veil? You'd think this kind of spectral fame would be reserved for tortured souls, unjustly executed queens maybe, or ghosts with unfinished vengeance arcs. But Henry? He died in bed, full of meat, surrounded by priests, and yet, he still haunts. Maybe because his life was one giant contradiction. He wanted control, but sowed chaos. He wanted love, but bred fear. He wanted sons, but left a line that fizzled out in 3 siblings and a dynasty that died with a virgin queen. Maybe he can't rest. Maybe no ghost is more restless than the man who thought his very presence held the kingdom together. Here's the scholarly debate, and yes, it actually exists in the margins of a few brave dissertations. Can collective cultural memory generate its own ghost? Not a literal one, but a kind of echo, a presence. The more we fixate on a figure, retell their story, embolden their myth, does that narrative start to act like a haunting? Not from the dead, but of the living. Because let's face it, Henry is everywhere. In musicals, in memes, in schoolroom rhymes and historic pubs and bad costume dramas where he's always yelling with a turkey leg. And maybe that constant invocation, that ritual of remembering, keeps him afloat, like a spirit made from repetition. Fringe theory. There are still a few practicing spiritualists who believe Henry isn't just a ghost. He's a guardian. Not benevolent, mind you, but a powerful presence still attached to the English monarchy. A protector of the realm in the most chaotic sense. Think less guardian angel, more drunken bouncer who occasionally sets things on fire. You sit back now, maybe a little amused, maybe a little unnerved, because the question isn't really is he still haunting us, it's how much of him have we let into the fabric of our culture? We tell stories of kings and think we're talking about history, but sometimes it's closer to ritual. Every retelling, every documentary, every cringy school play keeps him just a little bit alive. So if he is out there, hovering in some dark Tudor afterlife, you imagine he's pleased. No, thrilled. That 500 years later people still speak his name, that school kids chant rhymes about his wives, that mediums and skeptics alike give him a spotlight. Because in life, Henry couldn't bear to be ignored, and in death, it seems, he still isn't. You're standing in front of a merchandise shelf now. Yes, a merch shelf, somewhere between the Tudor-themed tea towels and the Henry VIII action figures with removable wives. The king has made the leap from history to hobby, and somehow he fits. Not comfortably maybe, but confidently. He glares from coffee mugs, he winks from fridge magnets, he's been rendered into cartoon, caricature, collectible. And you can't help but ask, how did a rotting 16th century autocrat become a 21st century brand? The answer, as always with Henry, is complicated. It starts with the portraits. You know the one, the Holbein masterpiece. Wide stance, hands on hips, chest puffed like he's holding his breath for the entire realm. That painting isn't just famous, it's iconic. People who couldn't tell you the difference between Henry VII and Henry Ford can still recognise that image. And that's not accidental. Holbein painted Henry the way Henry saw himself, as the embodiment of power, as a man so in charge he barely needs a neck. That image became the blueprint. Over the centuries, it hardened into a symbol of Englishness, equal parts intimidation and absurdity. So when modern media came calling, it had a built-in icon to sell, and sell it they did. First came the books, then the movies, then the jokes. You remember the 1970s sitcoms where Henry shows up with a foam turkey leg and bad teeth? Or the melodramatic costume dramas where every scene includes someone screaming treason and someone else getting beheaded in soft lighting? Henry became a trope, a genre, a shortcut. The king you pull out when your story needs chaos, gluttony, or the world's worst Tinder history. And then came the musical. Six, the pop musical that lets each of Henry's wives tell their side of the story, isn't just clever, it's cultural exorcism. It flips the script, putting the women centre stage and letting Henry be the loud off-screen threat, the punchline, the X, in glitter. It's wildly successful. Teenagers leave the theatre quoting Anne Boleyn like she's a Marvel character. And here's the twist. The show still sells Henry, even when it mocks him. Maybe especially when it mocks him. Because he's become so exaggerated, so mythologized, he can't really be hurt by satire anymore. He just absorbs it, like historical Teflon. Fringe detail? There's a Henry VIII-themed pub in Yorkshire where the men's bathroom has a mural of all 6 wives giving judgmental side-eye over the urinals. Classy, number memorable? Definitely. And that's the thing. People remember Henry even when they forget the context. Even when the nuance is gone, the brand remains. You walk through a museum gift shop next, and there he is again, on socks, on pint glasses, on a puzzle where you match the headless wives to their correct necklines. And it's not just tacky fun, it's part of how history survives, not in textbooks, but in t-shirts, not in archives, but in algorithms. Henry VIII has become a meme with mass, and that's where things get weirdly philosophical, because at some point Henry stops being a person and starts being a container, a vessel for jokes, for outrage, for fascination. We use him to talk about toxic masculinity, about power, about celebrity. He's both the example and the warning, both king and clown. People put him on mugs not because they like him, but because he's recognisably awful in a way that feels, somehow, safe to laugh at. But the scholarly world hasn't let him go either. His face still looms on book covers. His name still triggers conference panels. Every few years a new biography hits shelves, each one claiming to finally crack the code. Was he a genius or a monster? A reformer or a wrecking ball? They argue over letters, reanalyse his will, pull apart inventories of his socks, because everyone wants to find the real Henry, the man beneath the legend. And here's the scholarly debate that keeps circling the drain like a ghost with a crown. Did Henry mean to become a legend? Or did he just fall into it? Some argue that his obsession with image, his portraits, his pageantry, his repeated attempts to micromanage legacy, wasn't narcissism, it was strategy. He knew history would look back. He knew power didn't just rest in the sword, it lived in the story. Others say that's giving him too much credit, that he was just loud, indulgent, and unpredictable enough to leave a mark no one could scrub off. Fringe theory. A few performance studies scholars argue that Henry was the first modern celebrity, that he curated a public persona so divorced from his actual self that he became a walking spectacle. The court followed his moods like paparazzi follows an Instagram feed. His dinners were public performances, his marriages were state-sponsored reality shows. If you squint, Henry VIII invented brand management, and now, centuries later, we're still consuming it. You reach the end of the aisle and find a snow globe. Inside, a miniature Henry in his throne, flanked by 6 worried-looking brides. When you shake it, glitter falls like powdered sugar. The ridiculousness is complete. And somehow you're not laughing. Not entirely. Because it hits you. He got what he wanted. Immortality. Not the kind wrapped in bronze or buried beneath a cathedral, but the kind you can't unsee. He's in textbooks and musicals and bathroom jokes and memes and midnight YouTube dives. He's both distant and immediate, dead and everywhere. And maybe that's the lesson. Not about power or religion or even history, but about presence, about how some people, through noise, through ego, through sheer gravitational madness, manage to keep pulling the spotlight long after they're gone. So you walk out of the shop, the bell jingling behind you, the cold evening pressing in. Somewhere under stone, or maybe nowhere at all, the real Henry lies still, but his shape, his shadow, is stamped across every corner of culture. Not because we love him, but because we can't look away. It's almost midnight now, and you find yourself back where all of this started, beneath a dim sky outside Windsor Castle. Cold stones soaking up moonlight, the chapel looming in soft silhouette. You've walked through the palaces and paintings, through the scandals and surgeries, through the bones and the bodies and the half-forgotten vaults. You've followed Henry VIII from cradle to crypt, from Lion of England to bloated myth, and here you are, still wondering. Because after everything, the strangest truth is this. We still don't know how Henry died. Not really. We have guesses. We have symptoms. We have descriptions of pus and prayer and a deathbed soaked in rot and velvet. But the actual cause, the thing that finally brought the monster down, still debated, still mysterious. Was it renal failure? Heart disease? Sepsis from that festering leg? A stroke? Or just the weight of being Henry VIII? That's the dark punchline of it all. A man who changed the world, whose whims rewrote religion, whose need for a male heir sent nations toppling, died without clarity, and was buried in confusion, in a vault he didn't choose, under a chapel that wasn't finished, with no great monument, no statue, just a stone slab someone remembered to carve 2 centuries later as an afterthought. Henry VIII, King of England, husband of 6, breaker of churches, devourer of meat, reduced to a few lines in a closed box. But maybe that's the most Tudor ending of all. A dynasty born in blood and betrayal, shaped by shadow, ending in silence. Still, his story won't sit still. Historians still pick at the carcass of his legacy like buzzards at a feast. Was he a tyrant or a visionary? Was he sincere in his faith? Or did he wear religion like a costume? Did he love his wives, or only the idea of what they could give him? Was he brilliant? Mad? Both. Every new theory reshuffles the cards, like a game of historical poker where the hand keeps changing and no one ever folds. Fringe detail? In 2023, a team of forensic linguists claimed to have identified subtle tonal shifts in Henry's letters during the last 5 years of his reign. Their theory? His brain was deteriorating. Not enough to be clearly noticed, but enough to make his writing stranger, more circular, more paranoid. The conclusion wasn't definitive, but it was eerie. The suggestion that even his words were rotting before his body gave out. And even weirder, the letters stopped suddenly about 6 weeks before his death. Not because he was too weak, but because, according to records, he refused to have them preserved. He started dictating out loud with no transcription. No one wrote it down. Whether from shame, pride, or fear, we'll never know what he said in those last days. Here's the debate still echoing. Does it matter? Does the grotesque, leaking death of a king tell us anything new about him? Or is it just morbid curiosity? History dressed up in gore? After all, we're talking about a man whose living self caused far more damage than his corpse ever could. A man who turned friends into enemies and wives into scapegoats, who gave us Protestantism and paranoia in equal measure, who loved his court like a stage and ruled like a hammer. And yet, you can't look away. You lean on the black railing just outside the chapel. No tourists now, no guards, just wind, and maybe the faint hum of the centuries. If ghosts exist, this is where they'd be. Not floating through halls in chains, but clinging to old mistakes, old legacies, quiet, stubborn, unfinished. You remember the ruptured coffin, the dog licking the royal fluids, the leg in the wall, the coffin that might not even be his. You remember the wax figure, the paranoid letters, the hidden ring with Anne Boleyn's portrait. All of it swirls together, refusing to make sense, refusing to settle. That's Henry. He isn't a straight line. He's a storm system. History keeps trying to categorize him, reformer, tyrant, victim of disease. But he keeps wriggling out, slipping between facts and fiction, flaring up like an old wound. And here's where it lands. Maybe we keep chasing Henry, not because we want to understand him, but because we can't. Because he's a perfect mirror for every question we still ask about power. What happens when one person has too much of it? What happens when ambition outweighs empathy? When legacy becomes an obsession? When no one can say no? Henry shows us the cost. In queens, in churches, in children who ruled too soon and burned too fast, in bones that were lost, in a country that still bears the shape of his decisions. And yet, we laugh. We make musicals, we buy t-shirts, we tell bedtime stories about the king who married 6 women and died of everything. You take one last look at the chapel before turning away. Somewhere beneath your feet, or maybe nowhere at all, Henry rests or doesn't. Maybe he's still leaking, maybe he's gone, but either way he's not finished with us, because kings die. But myths keep marching. So now, as the night draws in and the shadows lengthen across the pages of this strange, sprawling life, you take a breath and let it settle. Henry VIII, the man, the monarch, the myth, is finally quiet, at least for tonight. You've walked beside his cradle and his coffin, watched his kingdom bloom and bleed, traced the shape of his swollen leg and the ripple of his decisions echoing across centuries. And somehow, through all the fire and noise and royal absurdity, you've come to the only conclusion that makes sense. This king wasn't just bizarre. He was human, terrifyingly, hungrily, chaotically human. You saw him reach for heaven and fall face first into the mud. You saw him build, break, and rebuild England in his own image, all while limping toward a death he couldn't control and a legacy he couldn't stop polishing. And when it was over, when the body stopped twitching and the country finally exhaled, he left behind more than bones. He left a riddle, one wrapped in velvet, soaked in blood, and whispered in classrooms and ghost tours and late-night YouTube spirals. You can let him go now, just a little. Turn off the mental torchlight. Let the vault stay sealed for one more night. The ghost can sit in silence. The questions can rest. But if you feel something heavy pressing on your thoughts tomorrow, like the weight of too much power, or the memory of a crown that didn't quite fit, don't be surprised. That's just Henry, still lingering. Now close your eyes. Let the hum of the fan fill the space where the king once roared. Drift easy, knowing you survived him, just barely.